and together we will make America powerful again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America strong again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again. We will make America free again. And we will make America great again.
If you're in office today, and again, it's inheriting things. Every person that comes in.
I would shut down the border.
He would have shut it down.
I would shut it down overnight. You can't have a country if it doesn't have secure borders.
Why has, in your mind, Joe Biden continuously said, I don't have the power to do that?
He has the power to do that.
Of course he does.
Yeah, he does have the power to stop it. He does not need legislation. He can stop it. There's a number of things that he can be doing right now that I will do immediately when I'm elected to stop it. And there's basically three things he needs to do. There are the infrastructure issues. They need to finish those last 27 holes in the wall. You don't need a wall from Brownsville, Texas, 2,200 miles to San Diego.
But basically what Trump was doing was the right thing. You'd agree?
Yeah. And I would revive the Migrant Protection Act. That is the rule that requires people seeking asylum who come in through Mexico to make their application from Mexico, process their claims there, and before they come through. And then also I'd end the catch and release program, and I'd reinstate the catch and return program. And then they also need personnel. They need enough Border Patrol. And they need asylum court judges. But we could end it. There's a lot of other things that we can do, but we could end it.
So good morning, President Trump. Great to talk with you again. Let's get right to it. We know the economy and jobs will be big issues in this election, but I want to get your response to something President Biden said in Wisconsin last week. He was in Racine County promoting a $3.3 billion investment by Microsoft at that same location where you promoted a $10 billion investment by Foxconn in 2018. President Biden said, quote, they dug a hole with those golden shovels and then they fell into it. He added, quote, we make promises and we keep promises. As you know, Foxconn did not deliver on its original promise. So does that reflect on your record and how that would impact voters when they compare these two high-profile projects?
Well, Foxconn spent a lot of money. The government didn't put up very much at all. And we have other people, including them, continuing to look. And, what I brought in with the ships and all of the other economic development projects that I brought in, it's incredible. You got one of the biggest shipping contracts or ship contracts, and that was the building. And you people are doing a fantastic job on it. But we brought a lot of economic development. Plus, we did the USMCA, Mexico-Canada, and got rid of the worst trade deal ever and just made the best trade deal ever. So Wisconsin is really in love with what we've done, and that's why we're leading in the polls with Wisconsin.
President Trump, let me ask you about the Republican Party chair in Wisconsin has embraced early voting for 2024. Even RNC co-chair Laura Trump has said you have to play the hand you're dealt with, and that means as soon as you can vote, go vote. Will you personally encourage and endorse early voting in 2024?
Well, I do. I just encourage voting, period. But certainly early voting is something that is happening. I want to get back to paper ballots, same-day voting, and a voter ID. That's what we really should have, because the elections are not secure, and Wisconsin was a good case of that. So I want to get back to the same-day ballot. One day you vote. Everybody votes in one day. All the ballots are together. Paper, paper is very sophisticated. They do watermark paper, and it's very hard to cheat.
Yeah, and Wisconsin does have voter ID. The Republican National Convention in Milwaukee is 2 months away. You dominated the primaries and wrapped up the nomination quickly. But as you know, in states like Wisconsin, significant number of voters back Nikki Haley, 76,000 in Wisconsin, which can be a big difference, as you know, in a battleground state that can be decided by fewer than 25,000 votes. So my question to you is, what's your message to those Haley supporters, especially women voters? Will you try to bring them home by Election Day?
Well, she got very few voters relatively. I mean, I got almost, I guess, close to 90%. She got very few voters. And those voters are all coming to me. And you may have a lot of Democrats in there because they have a very tricky little system. But those voters are coming to me. We just did a poll where we're leading Biden by a lot in Wisconsin. When I say a lot, we're leading him by 2 or 3 points. We have one where we're leading him by 5 points. And I guess that's considered quite a bit. But we want to win the state. We've been really good to the state. It's a great state. And we want to bring it back home. We want to bring back jobs and bring back industry to Wisconsin.
There are now 2 debates between you and President Biden. But if RFK Jr. qualifies to be on that stage, will you still participate?
Well, I have no problem with him. I think he's really not doing well in the polls at all. His numbers have gone down a lot lately, but I would have no problem if he got whatever the threshold is. But he's very low, and he seems to be heading in the other direction, in the wrong direction. I would have no problem with it, though. If he qualified, I would have no problem.
One final question for you. What are the chances you will announce your vice president pick while in Milwaukee at the convention?
That's probably a pretty good chance, I would say. I don't say anything's 100%, but you're getting pretty close. I'll be doing it in Milwaukee. We're going to have a great time. It's a beautiful arena. It's a beautiful space. And we're spending a lot of money, and we're bringing it to the state. And I hope the people, when they vote, are going to remember that, because we're bringing a lot of jobs and a lot of economic development. We're bringing our convention, and we had plenty of options. We're bringing the convention to Milwaukee. It really is an important state for us. Wisconsin has to be won by us. We want to win it. If we win Wisconsin, I think we win the whole thing. And we create a border, a real border, because right now we have an open border with millions of people coming in illegally into our country. And they come from jails, and they come from mental institutions, and they're terrorists, many, many, many. And it's got to stop. They're destroying our country in so many ways. And inflation, too. We'll bring inflation way down. We're going to get energy costs in half. We'll be cutting your energy costs in half, maybe even less than that. Inflation's going to come tumbling down.
President Trump, we appreciate your time. We look forward to seeing you soon in Milwaukee.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
What do you do about the size and scope of the executive branch? It's completely unwieldy. You have enormous numbers of people who are supposed experts in their particular fields. How do you clean that out?
You do it one agency at a time, and I've sued almost all these agencies. I've sued NIH, CDC, FDA, EPA. I've sued USDA multiple times. You know, they didn't start out corrupted. They started out idealistic. They started out models for the rest of the world. They started out serving the public interest, and they didn't always do that perfectly because bureaucracies make mistakes. But you can restore those cultures. You stop the profiteering. FDA gets almost 50% of its budget from the pharmaceutical companies. Of course, that's not going to work. NIH scientists should not be able to collect royalties. We have to stop the revolving doors that put corporate capture on steroids. In these agencies, there are individuals at high levels who have corrupted them. And I'm not just talking about the agencies that I've sued, but also the CIA. I had dinner with Mike Pompeo about 4 months ago, and he said to me, and my one biggest regret in life is that I didn't clean up the CIA when I had a chance when I was running it. And he said, virtually the entire upper echelon of that agency are made up of individuals who do not believe in the democratic institutions of the United States of America. The upper echelons are controlled by the military-industrial complex and people who would do its bidding. When we sued Monsanto, we got discovery documents that showed that the head of the pesticide division at EPA for over a decade was taking his orders from the highest officials at Monsanto to make sure no study got done that would look at the links between glyphosate and cancer. I can tell you who those individuals are at CDC. Colleen Boyle, Frank DiStefano. I know the names because I've dealt with them. I know who has to be moved. President Trump wanted to do this. President Trump came in saying, I'm going to drain the swamp, but he didn't know how to do it. You have individuals who are capable of committing a civil disobedience that will turn off the lights somewhere, that will stop the sewage treatment plant, will flood the streets, and that will embarrass the president. So they tiptoe around these agencies and they never do anything about it because they don't know how to do it. But I know how. I know exactly what to do.
New York Times poll shows that RFK takes away way more votes from Biden than he does Trump in almost every swing state. So it's no surprise that President Biden doesn't want him on the debate stage. Our favorite friend David Drucker of The Dispatch will be at the Denver rally and joins us now. Is at all the media, and maybe I would even include News Nation in this, are we underreporting or emphasizing the significance, not of RFK's possibility to win, but his possibility to swing the election?
Well, we might be, and I think that's natural. I think one of the things we're trying to do at the Dispatch is not underestimate the prospects that RFK Jr. could have an impact on the race. It's why I'm headed to Denver on Sunday to check him out, cover his rally. I think, though, one of the reasons why we might be underplaying him so far is he's simply not on the ballot in many states. And you can't play spoiler if you're not on the ballot. And you have to be on the ballot, as you know, Leland, in the right states to impact the states that are going to decide the election.
All right, so are you voting for Robert Kennedy or against other candidates? It's not 50-50, but it's 60-40. For RFK against the other candidates is always above 40%. In Pennsylvania, it's 53%. And when you listen to RFK, he sort of has this pitch to people who don't like either Trump or Biden. He says the polarization now in America is worse than the Civil War. Take a listen.
The polarization between Americans, that, both of them say they don't like the division and they blame it on the other guy. It's more toxic now than at any time since the American Civil War. It's being amplified by the algorithms and the social media sites, and it is going to destroy our country if we don't figure out a way to bridge the divide and get people to see themselves as Americans again. President Trump and President Biden cannot do that.
Okay, and RFK Jr. can get us all to see each other as Americans again?
Well, he'll have to prove that he can. I mean, right now there's no indication that he's the guy to do this. He holds very heterodox views on a number of issues. And
David, I have no idea what heterodox means. I'm guessing what you're meaning is controversial?
It's sort of out-of-the-box views, right? I mean, I think most Americans think the measles vaccine is a good thing. I mean, RFK Jr. over the years has been opposed to most vaccines. He talks about things like the war machine and look, Americans may believe you need more defense spending or less. I don't think most people believe there's some secret cabal that's a war machine. And so even though Joe Biden and Donald Trump in particular are so polarizing, they are talking about the bread and butter issues most Americans care about the most. RFK Jr. is not. And so one of the things he has to do is, number one, give Americans confidence that he could actually function effectively as president, and then talk to them where they are and not just talk to the kinds of low propensity voters that don't tend to vote that often, who care more about these issues that are important to them but not important to a majority of Americans, at least when you rank them on a priority list.
So what I'm hearing you say is you got to go out and you've got to give people a reason to vote for you other than the assassination of JFK, mass shootings and antidepressants, the 2004 presidential election was stolen, these sort of very out-of-the-box ideas. You got to talk about inflation, the economy, and the border.
That and keeping America safe in the world and projecting American power and trying to calm all of these issues that we have raging around the globe. I think you hit it, Leland, and I just added an extra one. And that's all you should be talking about. You need to meet voters where they are.
All right. Well, you have the distinct duty of going to see the voters where they are and see if RFK's message is resonating with them in Trump's shadow, the battle for 2024 and the future of the GOP. was David's book. Now we are into Trump's perhaps last race that you will be covering. Good to see you, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks, Leland.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.
And welcome to Hannity. Wow, what a news night. Panic is in the air. Biden's poll numbers have never been lower, and prices, well, sadly, they continue to rise. Back-breaking inflation up 20% under Joe Biden and this administration, crushing you and your families. Now Biden's base is crumbling. Americans are suffering. And you see that African Americans, Hispanic Americans, younger voters, part of the Democratic coalition, they're leaving Joe Biden and going right to Donald Trump. They're desperately needing to make up ground. Well, Biden has now officially agreed to debate Donald Trump. How convenient. In a heavily edited, kind of cringeworthy video posted to social media, Biden put on a brave face, and he did his very, very best tough guy, Dirty Harry impersonation. Never thought I'd see it this bad. Take a look.
Donald Trump lost 2 debates to me in 2020. And since then, he hadn't shown up for debate. Now he's acting like he wants to debate me again. Well, make my day, pal. I'll even do it twice. So let's pick the dates, Donald. I hear you're free on Wednesdays.
Wow, that just made my day. Donald Trump has already agreed to 3 debates today, and he wants to do more. Well, not only we can double make your day, Joe. Why stop at 2? Historically, by the way, it's always been 3 debates, presidential debates, with the exception 2020. Why? Because of COVID. So Joe, Mr. Make My Day tough guy, why not the usual 3? Or how about 4? Or how about 1 a month until the election? You might have noticed, by the way, there were 5 separate edits in that 13-second video. I don't know, did Joe need assistance every 2.6 seconds? One can wonder. On X, one user compared the video, this is funny, to a claymation film. Another said that the jump cuts could cause a seizure. Wow. And as for Biden's generous offer to participate in 2 debates, it came with a ton of conditions, none of them mentioned during his 13-second Dirty Harry tough guy routine. Let's be clear. Joe Biden and the media mob, they don't get to collude and dictate all the terms of the debates, but that won't stop Joe and the mob from trying. Now, first, Mr. Make My Day Joe is demanding no audience. Apparently, Joe gets easily scared and likely gets disoriented from crowd noise, which would be new to him since he never gets a large crowd at any of his events, his short events. Now, 2, Biden wants third-party candidates and independents banned from the stage, including RFK Jr. Well, as of now, in order to debate third-party candidates, they need to be polling at 15%, qualify in enough states to get the Electoral College votes that are needed, but that should be negotiable. 3, Joe wants mics to be muted after the allotted speaking time expires, so no back and forth. I guess it's just too confusing for Joe to keep track. Now, I would add that moderators' mics, they need to be muted also after a question. Why? Because it's obvious the liberal media, they'd love to be 2-on-1 versus Donald Trump. No, that can't happen. Nor should networks be allowed to put anything on the screen but the names of the candidates, because they might try to hurt Donald Trump that way and participate that way. No go. And while we're at it, there should be no notes, no teleprompters, Joe. In other words, Joe, you don't get giant cheat sheets telling you where to stand and how to say hello and how to say goodbye. Meanwhile, Biden's 4th demand is that he's only willing to debate on only 4 liberal Biden-friendly news outlets. His choice, ABC, CBS, Telemundo, and fake news CNN. In response, Trump told Fox News this: I'm ready to go. The dates they proposed are fine, anywhere, anytime, any place. Let's see if Joe can make it to the stand-up podium. And Trump even agreed to hold the first debate on fake news CNN, a network filled with dishonest left-wing hacks we know who hate him. Now, this includes Dana Bash and fake Jake Tapper, who are now tasked, they say, with moderating the debate. Let me stop right here. I'm sorry, but the media mob and Joe Biden, I'll say it again, they don't get to collude and choose radical Biden-supporting hosts in the moderator's chair. Nice try, though. That means no fake Jake Tapper. Tapper is a radical, left-wing, partisan talk show host that masquerades as a journalist. Now, fake Jake, let's look at his career. It started as the press secretary for a Pennsylvania Democrat. Then he worked for a D.C. public relations firm and a gun control group named Handgun Control, Inc. Tapper even had a stint at the radical far-left publication Salon.com before eventually making his way to fake news CNN, where all of a sudden now he wants to be called and considered a journalist. Make no mistake, fake Jake Tapper might be a lot of things. He's no journalist. And like everyone else in the media mob, Tapper spent the last several years obsessively hating all things Donald Trump, even retweeting a comment from a notorious Trump hater calling Trump, quote, 100% insane. Tapper said the tweet is noteworthy, but that's not all. You decide.
As we watch Donald Trump attempt to turn his arrest and indictment into some sort of campaign commercial, the folks in the control room, I don't need to see any more of that. He's trying to turn this in. He's trying to turn it into a spectacle, into a campaign ad. That's enough of that. We've seen it already. Here he is right now under my voice. You hear him repeating his anti-immigrant rhetoric. President Trump, now in quarantine, has become a symbol of his own failures. He is running the single most negative, sleazy campaign in American history for a major party candidate. If you were to open up a copy of Hitler's Mein Kampf, you would find the Nazi leader describing the mixing of non-Germans with Germans as poisoning. There's really no other way to say it. Donald Trump's language mirrors this directly. He pushes the government of the United States to use its power and credibility to justify his lies.
Does that sound like a journalist or a talk show host with very liberal leanings? To be clear, Joe Biden will already be debating in friendly territory with moderators who want him to win. Fake Jake is disqualified. And by the way, the media mob, the Biden campaign alone, do not get to collude and decide if Donald Trump is willing to go on a liberal network, then everyone must agree on who moderates. Not much more, to choose from there, but they'll find somebody. Maybe Dana Bash will be all right. I don't know. Otherwise, Joe will lie with impunity. And while Trump will be forced to debate Biden and the liberal talk show hosts at CNN, stop, take that off the air. He's lying. Oh, okay. But that's the person you want to moderate? Biden's list of demands will also be in effect, and I have no doubt that jacked up Joe will probably return to the stage after a heavy dose of, caffeine, Red Bull, or whatever he took before the State of the Union. That was weird. Don't expect a walk in the park. Anyway, by Biden, the media mob excluding Trump from any input is beyond unfair. It is beyond insulting. They know that Trump and his team won't just bow at their altar and agree to only one-sided terms negotiated likely in secret beforehand. Joe, even announced this thing. They probably were all discussing it, knowing that, if we just agree, he'll have to do what we say. It's going to be Joe's way or the highway. What he's really trying to do here is ultimately, maybe he's really cowering away from any real debate. Either take my chosen liberal network with my chosen moderator, with all my rules, or I'm not going to debate, secretly hoping that Donald Trump insists on basic fairness so they can duck and dodge and cower and hide and say, see, we tried to debate. Let's see, the American people, they deserve a fair debate. They deserve 3 fair debates at least. Maybe Joe Biden just isn't up to a fair debate. Just this morning, he tripped again as he barely shuffled onto the stage in front of the Capitol. This after last night's disastrous exit after a speech. And earlier this week, he seemingly needed directions how to get back to the White House after a short speech outside. Nancy Pelosi, other top Democrats, are begging Biden, don't debate Trump. He doesn't have a choice. Look at your screen. Latest poll, New York Times, Trump up by 12. Nevada, he didn't win Nevada in 2016 or 2020. Up by 10 in Georgia, 7 Michigan, 7 Arizona, 3 in Pennsylvania. If that holds, it is game over for Biden. And according to prominent Democratic strategist James Carville, I've debated him. I actually like him. I don't agree with the thing he says. Joe Biden's in big trouble. Everything they're throwing at Trump ain't working. Take a look.
In Trump's more ahead than he's ever been. It's going the wrong way. It's not working. Everything that we're throwing is spaghetti at a wall, and none of it is sticking, me included.
So far, none of the cheap political ploys have worked. Not the identity politics, not the fear-mongering, not the lying about the economy or the border. The left's sloppy lawfare campaign is actually making Trump more popular. And you can forget about Biden's policies, improving his poll numbers. They have been an unmitigated disaster. So now these debates are almost like a Hail Mary for the Biden campaign, which is a pretty tough pill to swallow for the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre. Take a look.
So should we see this sudden offer from the president to debate as a signal that you guys realize you need to change the subject after some really bad polling?
You know, we had a back and forth on polling yesterday. I just don't want to get into polling, any more details on polling. As it relates to the debate, you got to talk to the campaign about it. That is a question for the campaign, and I'm sure they are eager to answer your questions, Peter.
Democrats, Biden are desperate, but this race is far from over. 173 days away. There's nothing the left won't do to win an election. Think about it. They'll even trot out Joe Biden to a debate stage. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.
I think I know why Joe Biden is agreeing, though. There's an article in the New Republic, and it says the Democrats have a Joe Biden problem. When you look, the polls rightly calls panic among Democrats, but it also shows that the election is not a lost cause for the party, talking about the other candidates. While the numbers for Biden specifically are terrible, other Democrats are performing quite well. And they cite Nevada, which the candidate is up by 12. They cite Arizona, and they cite Pennsylvania. So essentially, there's a call behind the scenes for the Democrats to move away from Biden, and they don't mean pick a different candidate, but to focus down ballot and not Joe Biden. That's why he needed this debate to happen.
Well, in order to qualify for a debate, you have to be on enough state ballots to win an electoral college majority, and you have to score 15% in at least 4 major national polls. RFK Jr. says he's going to meet the criteria for at least one of them before the June 20th deadline. So we'll see about that. Nancy Pelosi was asked if she thought that Joe Biden should have agreed to a debate. Listen.
I myself would never recommend going on a stage with Donald Trump, but the president has decided that's what he wants to do. I think the format he is suggesting is a good one. I think you all should have separate town hall meetings with them, let them challenge them with questions about the future, and let the public make its decision.
And the public is going to get the opportunity to see them, you know, presidential candidates, even before either of them are nominated by their party. It's going to be the earliest ever, and you got to want. You know, I heard Byron York say yesterday, with early voting, you need early debates, and he's absolutely right. But what is the plus for Joe Biden? Well, if he stumbles, there's plenty of time behind it. And apparently what the Biden camp thinks they can do is, by announcing this so early and having them so early, they can jolt the American public that is not paying attention to the race. Hey, these are the 2 guys. You got to pick between these 2 guys. Okay, look at these 2 guys. Which do you like? And the Biden camp thinks that will force people to say, okay, I don't like Joe Biden, but I'm going to go for him.
Yeah, they think they want to remind the American public of the Trump years, and the Biden people think that's a great thing. They said because Trump is chaos. I say this, For 2.5 years, you told him he was illegitimate. You put a nonstop Russia investigation on every time they had success, some Russia allegation popped up. Can you imagine if they just leveled the playing field and just called him on his policies instead of trying to prove he was illegitimate? They asked people at Fox, do you think the debates are important? 41% said extremely important. 23% said very important. And I'll add one more thing to the fray. As I brought up, the problem I have with this format are the moderators. They despise Trump.
Partisans.
They're nonstop partisans. It doesn't mean they're not bright. It doesn't mean they're not good at their job. But they have a bias against one candidate. They should be eliminated. Is there anyone there non-biased? And number two is you can't kill their mics. I don't want to see two guys speaking. We get that all the time. The whole point of this is the interaction.
Right.
And if you're going to, then it's going to put all the pressure on the moderators. So you'll have Donald Trump will say I had the best economy ever. Well, not according to the numbers. Next question. You know, those throwaway lines at the end that moderators always do when they don't like what.
And to that point, Brian, I also would just like to see the questions asked. Just ask the questions. The getting involved in the debate process, I think, is going to leave a bad taste in the American public. And I think that's how they put their thumb on the scale when they start getting involved. Let the candidates duke it out. I think also a positive for Donald Trump is that there's not going to be a crowd there. He's an entertainer. So he plays to the crowd. Yeah. He likes to cheer. This is what he's done his whole life. Not having people there, I think, will calm him down.
Which a lot of critics have been critical of Joe Biden for that reason, because they're saying Donald Trump feeds off the crowd. Yep. Joe Biden didn't want a crowd. And Donald Trump, I agree, it's television. You want it to be entertaining. And if you can't hear their responses, because if Joe Biden answers a question, Donald Trump might say, liar, or whatever, you know? Like, you want to hear that.
That's
you want it to be entertaining.
Well, we just put up the rules, and one of them was they cut the mics only after the time is up. So there's a possibility, you would imagine, that if during Joe Biden's time, Donald Trump interrupts him, you would think that that would be played. It's just after, okay, everybody's got 1 minute. I feel sorry for the audio guy. He's got to, not only does he have to figure out which volume control, but then he's got to have a stopwatch. Time's up, boom. Let's see.
Yeah,
let's see.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Also, Donald Trump, I think, it's to his advantage to let Joe Biden talk.
Yeah, just let him go.
Because he talks in circles.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.
Kayleigh McEnany, co-host, outnumbered in many things. Hey, Kayleigh, good morning to you. We had a poll. A lot of numbers came out last night. Let's just go through them, okay? This relates to the debate, and we asked whether or not it's important to the American people. This is what we found. But Trump and Biden debate, number one, thank you. Extremely important to American voters. If you include RFK, it's kind of split, right? 23, 20, 26, 29. Well, here's what happened in one of those debates back in 2020. Roll it.
He doesn't want to answer the question. I'm not going to answer the question
Why would you answer that question?
The question is, the question is,
Justice, radical left.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen.
That was really a productive segment, wasn't it? Keep yapping, man. Look, hey, I'm not going to listen to him. Well, it's hard to get any word in with this clown. Excuse me, this.
Hey, let me just say.
Well, apparently the microphones are going to be off when the other person's not talking this time.
Probably a good thing. Look, 64%, according to that poll, very or somewhat want to see, very or extremely want to see a debate. So the Biden administration knew that they needed to debate. The campaign went out there and they cleverly crafted where now they have 2 debates instead of 3 on their terms. Look, the challenge for both of them, for Trump, it's to stick to the issues. He wins on the issues. He has a story to tell. Biden doesn't want to talk about the issues. Look at the timing of this. It is after this case. It is likely right after the immunity decision comes out, which most people think Trump will prevail on. It's in Atlanta, Fulton County indictment. Biden wants to make this all about the legal issues. He wants to distract from the substance in the story. So if Trump can stay on message and not let substance detract from, or style detract from substance, he can very easily win this debate.
That's some great points, too.
It also comes after the New York Times poll, which solidified the thinking across the board that Biden is in denial about the polls. And we also understand from Jackie Heinrich's reporting that Biden's the one who said, I want to debate. And the staff was like, sir, it's like maybe not. But it is happening because, as you know, once the president says, I'm doing it, it happens. So let's pull up call for number 4 about the issues. So this is our poll that shows Biden prevailing a bit on abortion, healthcare, election integrity, tied on energy policy, which I find surprising, but okay. But to your point, Trump's got to focus on the issues. Trump prevailing on foreign policy, crime, economy, and immigration by quite a lot. So if you have that basket of issues that people care about, and we know that Trump wants to stick on the issues if he can,
right,
he should probably win the debate.
If you told me I was winning on abortion and healthcare, but losing on every single other issue, including all the top issues to voters, I would want to be dealt the second hand of cards. Trump has the right hand of cards in his hand. This microphone situation will likely help him, cutting it off, not talking over the other. And I think we've seen of late, particularly in the last 3 weeks, a particularly message-disciplined candidate in Trump. The stakes are high. The stakes are personal for him, very personal, as he stares down a very perilous legal path should he not win the election. So I think you're going to see a message-disciplined Trump. Biden's counting on Trump 1.0 showing up, incumbent Trump. We know incumbents typically have hard times in the first debate. He's counting on that. I don't think you can count on that.
Well, you have to figure why yesterday they went on offense. And I think we can show from our Fox polling ourselves. We've seen other numbers that are worse. But this is what we found. Among black voters, he's down 7 points from 2020. Among Hispanic voters, just a point. Suburban women down 7 points. Moderates down 8 points. And here's where I think this election is. Really, you can find the truth about how people are feeling about the presidency. Under age 30, he's down 14 points. And it may sound ageist to say it, but young people see him as an older man, and I don't know how more delicately to put that.
Yeah, and young people not only see him for that, but they also see the fact that they can't afford homes. The interest rates are sky high. The housing prices are sky high, and they are facing down huge grocery bills with inflation. I would not underestimate, though, the power of TikTok. Most young people get their news from social media. Biden has a TikTok operation. I was thrilled to see the super PAC for Trump getting out there on TikTok. I think TikTok's not good for society, but you got to use it if you're a candidate. So you can't count on young people. If you want to try to make sure those young people are driven to the polls and aren't just motivated by the issues, make sure you're out on TikTok, on social media, to bring those voters over to your column on Election Day.
What do you think about the idea that the vice presidential debate will be so early in the end of July?
Yeah, in the end of July, there needs to be another debate. I think there needs to be another debate closer to Election Day. I think we'll end up seeing one. It depends how this goes. Look, we could have the first debate and Biden says, whoa, that was brutal. It's time to parse these in. But look, that's a big debate. First time Kamala Harris standing up against someone who needs to bring in suburban women. You saw that's where Biden was doing best in that poll that you mentioned. That VP candidate will have that moment on the debate stage to try to win over suburban women and message perhaps in a way different than Trump, but complementary.
Just one last point. I know Trump's been saying anytime, anywhere, you call it, you name it. They have an empty lectern, I think, at the stage at a lot of his rallies. I think Trump jumped the gun. I think he went too fast before he could negotiate the qualifications for the debate itself. I mean, there's a real... See, what Trump wants is Biden to walk in, everybody to look and say, oh my.
Yeah.
There's a real good chance they're sitting at a table. And the camera comes up, and they're already in position. And that moment will be gone.
There will be no crowd. There will be no energy. And you will be sitting before a moderator who called the Trump presidency a nightmare. So this is definitely home territory for Joe Biden, in my opinion. Trump can compensate for that, but it will be a very different dynamic. And the curse of heightened expectations for Trump and low expectations for Biden, you want to try to reverse that ahead of 6 weeks from
That's why Greg Gutfeld last night on the 5 said Biden's an amazing debater and he's going to be amazing. He's going to do so well in this debate.
Yes, exactly. That's a good way to put it.
Thanks, Kayla. See you at noon. Okay, thanks for coming in.
I'm Steve Doocy. I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. All right, Robbie, what's on your radar today?
Well, Brianna, President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump have agreed to participate in 2 presidential debates, one in June and one in September, after both candidates bucked the Commission on Presidential Debates, the nonprofit organization that has managed such affairs since 1988, the year I was born. Biden had a list of demands regarding the terms of this debate, such as the elimination of the traditional live audience and inclusion of microphones that will immediately cut off when the candidate's time has elapsed and the other person is speaking. Apparently, these terms were amenable to Trump, who nevertheless complained that Biden is afraid of crowds. So this means the candidates have officially killed the proposal put forth by the commission, which wanted 3 debates somewhat closer to Election Day in September and in October. There is nothing sacred about the commission, and these new debates may well be an improvement over what took place last election cycle. Now, preventing the candidates from interrupting each other would also be a significant win for the viewing public and everyone involved. That said, Biden and Trump have utterly failed, unsurprisingly, to agree to the most desirable change, which would have been to include more candidates. The commission infamously restricted its debates to just candidates polling above a 15% threshold. Now, in 2016, this meant that Libertarian Party candidate Gary Johnson was excluded despite polling as high as 13% in some surveys. By mutual decree, Biden and Trump are sticking with this arbitrary limitation. Now, in a statement, the Biden campaign said the purpose of the debate was to compare the only 2 candidates with, quote, any statistical chance of prevailing in the Electoral College, and not to, quote, waste time on candidates with no prospect of becoming president. That's a rather direct rebuke of independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's currently polling at about 10%. RFK Jr. is not currently in a position to win the presidential election, but he could have a major impact. Polls show he's currently pulling votes from Biden and Trump in somewhat equal measure. He's also attracted a following among anti-establishment populist and even some libertarian voters. If either Biden or Trump were to make an appeal to previous supporters who have decamped for RFK Jr. and win them back, it could be the difference for either of them on Election Day. Now, of course, both major party candidates are probably more worried about the opposite thing happening, RFK Jr. winning an even greater number of their voters. Their present actions betray them. The Biden campaign is doing everything in its power to undermine RFK Jr.'s ballot access drive, while Trump, desperate to remind his base of RFK Jr.'s decidedly non-conservative views on guns, environmental regulation, and also abortion. RFK Jr. holds an eclectic mix of views, some of which appeal to supporters of limited government like myself. He opposed COVID-19 mandates, he's worried about federal efforts to suppress dissent on social media, and he does not want to continue sending billions in foreign aid to Ukraine. Yet he remains a progressive liberal on a range of social and economic issues. He recently expressed support for both student loan debt forgiveness and for affirmative action. He is keen to join the debate stage. He recently issued a challenge to Trump to debate him later this month at the Libertarian National Convention, where both candidates will be speaking. Hopefully, the party will make time for its own prospective candidates as well as Trump. Now, Trump does not seem likely to take RFK Jr. up on the offer. Like Biden, Trump wants a presidential debate safe space where the 2 ex-presidents only have to face each other. And they are being perfectly clear about that, even though it's embarrassing, should be embarrassing, for the campaigns to be afraid to debate RFK Jr. Check out the reaction from Biden and Trump world figures when they were asked directly by News Nation's Chris Cuomo about including RFK Jr. on the debate stage.
But let's get to the players. We have the co-chair of the Republican National Committee on Arrangements, David Bossie, and former traveling press secretary on Biden's 2020 campaign, Michael LaRosa. It's good to have you both. Do either of you want Kennedy on the stage? No. Okay, so let's go to why you think you're going to win. I start with you, Brother Bossie.
Now, in a statement, RFK Jr. called out his opponents for running scared. Quote, Presidents Trump and Biden are colluding to lock America into a head-to-head matchup that 70% say they do not want. They are trying to exclude me from their debate because they are afraid I would win. Keeping viable candidates off the debate stage undermines democracy. 43% of Americans identify as independents. If Americans are ever going to escape the hammerlock of the 2-party system, now is the time to do it. These are the 2 most unpopular candidates in living memory. By excluding me from the debate stage, President Biden and Trump seek to avoid discussion of their 8 years of mutual failure, including deficits, wars, lockdowns, chronic disease, and inflation. End quote. Now, RFK Jr. also tweeted he believes he will meet the criteria to be included in the first debate hosted by CNN in June. His running mate, Nicole Shanahan, just committed to spend $8 million of her own money to help him with ballot access and to raise his profile so he can qualify. But Biden has already made his position clear. He will debate Trump and only Trump. meaning that RFK Jr. would somehow, to be included, Biden would presumably pull out of the debate. A safe space, indeed.
I think that there's no arguing with RFK Jr.'s position there. It is a clearly naked effort to prevent Americans from realizing that they have any other alternatives. It is like a cyclical argument that the two major parties make. No one else is going to win, therefore you shouldn't care that we're excluding anybody from a debate because they never have a chance to win. But of course, they never have a chance to win, very tautologically, because they never get an opportunity to come before the American public. And it's not just that. I think your point about Shanahan, RFK Jr.'s VP, spending $8 million of our own money to help with ballot access issues. You don't want to yada, yada, yada that, because that's another really significant way they prevent third-party candidates from ever being able to have a bite at the apple. Jill Stein's going through this right now in New York State without the benefit of having a VP who's a billionaire who can fund these kinds of things. During 2020, Governor Cuomo, kind of without people really noticing what he was doing, upped the number of required signatures to get on the ballot from 15,000 to 45,000, tripling it. And given how these signatures are often routinely contested by the major parties, even if they know the signatures are good, you contest every signature if there's a spelling error, if it's illegible, if there's not a match between the current address of the signatory and the address that they put on the sheet, then they throw out a huge number of signatures. So you tend to need like 2 or 3 times as many as is even required. And then even if you have accurate signatures, the parties go after you, they send your legal team after you just to keep you wrapped up in court, drain your very limited resources as a third-party candidate, and hope that it disincentivizes you from even trying to get on the ballot in the first place. And that's a huge obstacle. And most people, again, don't have the advantage of having a billionaire backer as your VP. So what does this really mean about the state of our democracy?
Right. And how the task of getting to that level of polling approval, to that level of name recognition, to that level of people even understanding what you're for, it helps to be on the debate stage to do that. So it's like you have to, the thing that would help you get that, you can't have until you already have made that threshold, the tautology that you're talking about. Yeah, I remember going through this with Gary Johnson in 2016, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, two very unpopular candidates. People actually checking out the Libertarian Party for some of its best poll numbers that it had ever gotten. And he was like 12, 13, 14%, just not quite close enough, because 15% was the magic number.
Yeah.
And what a deprivation for the American public not to be able to see him on the debate stage. I think RFK Jr. is in a very similar circumstance where the combined average or whatever polls they're looking at, it doesn't add up to 15. But of course it doesn't matter, because they're not going by the Presidential Debate Commission rules. That's their rules. They're going by whatever Biden and Trump and CNN have worked out. And what they've clearly worked out is that there will be no one else. Biden has been unequivocal on that. Trump feels the same way as far as we can tell. I'm sure he does. He has no desire to have the spotlight stolen from him by RFK Jr. If anything, I think RFK Jr. on the debate stage might in some way hurt Trump more than Biden, because Trump loves the stage. He wants the attention, where I think Biden's more just almost trying to get through it. He knows he has to.
I think that might be right. This is also why the media blackouts that happen are so important, and how these legacy media companies end up being very much, in cahoots, for lack of a better term, with the two parties. Because again, that's the other mechanism people can use to get in front of the public. And when you have complete and total blackouts of even Democratic nominees, as we saw with Bernie Sanders, what chance does someone like RFK Jr., Jill Stein, or Cornel West have in the middle of all of this? Truly, this is a kind of once-in-a-generation opportunity with RFK Jr., because he happens to be a Kennedy. He happens to have kind of an unprecedented number of baked-in name recognition. And this is why we end up in these conversations often on the left about, well, can we find a celebrity candidate? People were kind of hopeful about Cornel West, because at least he's a sort of known public quantity in some sectors at least, and maybe that would help give him a little bit of a boost. But it shouldn't come down to that. It shouldn't be that we just have to find, a former wrestler or, a movie star actor or something like that to get any attention and any traction as a presidential campaign. Shouldn't it come down to the fact they're actually reflecting the interest and the will of the electorate? No, it's never about that, and it's because of the way the system has been rigged.
Well, and I really appreciate our friends at News Nation putting surrogates for the campaigns for the Biden team, for Trump team, on record as admitting that, no, they want to keep him out of the process as much as possible. That's that two-party duopoly for you. More Rising right after this.
Voters in the U.S. have less than 6 months to go before they choose a new president. But many are dissatisfied with the leading candidates. Now a third alternative is looking to capture their votes. NHK World's Daniel Okai has the story.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
When Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced his candidacy last October, he began with instant name recognition. He is running as an independent. His anti-establishment message appeals to both Democrats and Republicans who hesitate to support the two major candidates.
Our campaign is a spoiler. I agree with that. It's a spoiler for President Biden and for President Trump.
Kennedy is the nephew of President John F. Kennedy and the son of Attorney General and Senator Robert Kennedy. The younger Kennedy became well known as an environmental lawyer. In recent years, Kennedy has been controversial for his vaccine skepticism and is sometimes labeled a conspiracy theorist. More than 15 Kennedy family members have opposed his candidacy, saying it's dangerous for the country.
The Kennedy family endorses Joe Biden for president.
Nonetheless, he continues to present himself as someone who can reduce the hostility between the major parties.
Neither of these presidents is capable of ending the polarization, which is also toxic and existential in our country. We need to start looking at each other and seeing Americans who are concerned, who love our country.
That message resonates with those who attend his rallies.
These are the 700 additional pamphlets too.
Fantastic.
Wystan Simmons has been a lifelong Democrat. This election, though, she's supporting Kennedy.
Both of those parties are involved in just making the other guy look dumb. That's a waste of everyone's time. Here you see Mr. Kennedy. He's willing to stand in the gray zone. Nobody else does that. Because he goes across the party lines and unites people of all kinds.
The latest poll averages show Kennedy hovering around 10% support. And in a few pivotal states, Kennedy could tip the election. Both major candidates have been telling their bases he's the wrong choice. This video from the Democratic Party points out that Kennedy received millions of dollars from Trump's biggest donor, and they attempt to paint him as a Trump surrogate. Trump's message is the opposite.
RFK Jr. is, as you know, the most radical left candidate in the race.
Well, 80% of the people in this country now say that they don't want to have to choose between President Trump and President Biden, that we will win in November.
Even if he doesn't make good on that prediction, Kennedy has the potential to disrupt the outcome of the election. That is one thing that both parties can agree on. Daniel Okai, NHK World, Washington.
Israel just announced that its forces recovered 3 bodies of Israelis taken hostage from the music festival on October 7th. Meanwhile, trucks carrying humanitarian aid began rolling into Gaza Friday using a temporary pier built by the U.S., delivering desperately needed supplies. The floating dock is part of a makeshift effort by the U.S. to compensate for a number of crossings that have been shut and are crucial to supply the food, fuel, and other supplies.
500,000 people have fled the southern city of Rafah as Israel presses forward with its promised assault. Originally, Rafah was deemed a safe haven for people to flee, and numbers of displaced swelled to nearly 2 million. The situation on the ground has been described as desperate, with the United Nations describing Gaza near the verge of famine.
Meanwhile, back at home, RFK Jr. came on Russell Brand's podcast and declared his support once again for Israel. Let's watch.
You know, I don't believe that there's a genocide going on, and I don't think Israel's intention is genocide. I don't believe there's any evidence of genocide. There is genocide going on in the Mideast, but it's a genocide of Jews, and it's a genocide of Christians, and nobody's complaining about it for some reason. And there are much worse wars than what's happening in Gaza right now, but for some reason, people don't want to complain unless it's Jews who can be blamed. The idea of saying that there's a genocide going on in Israel because people die in war, and the And, that in every war that's going on in the world today, there are civilians dying. And the average death rate, civilian to combatant death rate, according to the United Nations and to the Institute for the Study of Urban Warfare at West Point, is about 9 to 1. But in Gaza, it's about 1 to 1. So they've achieved they protected in the most challenging conditions. The Israeli government the IDF has protected civilians better than any army in history. John Spencer said it has done more to protect civilians under more difficult circumstances than any army in history.
So what did you make there, Jessica, of RFK's talking about the ratio of civilian to military casualties in various wars? He claimed that the civilian to military casualty ratio in the Israel-Gaza war is much lower than it typically is in combat.
Yeah, I would disagree with that. I mean, there's official statistics from human rights agencies around the world that go directly against what RFK Jr. said right there. I mean, from the IDF directly, they've described the ratios of civilians to combatants that they desire as like 3 to 1 in some cases. And so when you think about this coming directly from them, RFK Jr.'s statement there is ridiculous. To say also that Christians and Jewish people are being genocided in the Middle East, what is he referring to? Because what we're talking about right now is the war by Israel on Gaza and Palestine. The casualties are over 35,000 Palestinians and around 1,400 Israelis. So to look at those numbers and to assess the ICJ case, there was just additional evidence added by South Africa in their case against Israel for genocide in the International Court of Justice, where they found evidence of Israel using extermination zones, which is, a key component of many genocides and a part of how they define and prosecute genocides. And so when you look at the facts of just the death toll of what's going on in Gaza and now Rafah, to have Netanyahu say there can be no Palestine, there can be no self-governance of Gaza post-war, to have the United States saying, well, we disagree with that, to have members of the Netanyahu administration saying there are no innocent people in Gaza. These are ridiculous statements. To have the death toll be what it is and say there's not a genocide against Palestinians when there's been plausible evidence of a genocide against Palestinians as determined by the International Court of Justice, and to look at the death toll of Israelis, it's just absolutely ridiculous coming from RFK Jr.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what his point of doing the whataboutism was on the persecution of Christians in the Middle East, but that is true. I mean, in places like Syria and Libya, there is consistent persecution of Christians, including mass murder, but sort of separate from the point. Let's get into the politics of this, because if you're someone who is pro-Palestinian on the left, you're not happy with the Biden administration's posture on the war, but you're also not happy with what RFK says. I mean, he's actually probably vociferously more pro-Israel than Biden is. So what do you do in November? Who do you vote for? Do you vote at all?
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden certainly doesn't have my vote. Donald Trump doesn't have my vote. I don't see RFK Jr. as a viable alternative. I think a lot of people who are on the far left, who are very critical of Joe Biden for the ongoing genocide, are facing this very difficult decision of, do we vote for someone who's been a pro-labor president in some respects, who's passed public funding that's led to big infrastructure projects that are necessary through the bipartisan infrastructure law, where you have billions of dollars allocated to good paying union jobs, resulting in potentially national rail networks, the first high-speed rail being completed in the U.S., and the Buy America requirements, ensuring that a lot of the manufacturing, not just building the railroad itself, is going to happen in the U.S., and it's going to be good union jobs. How do you trade that off? What he's done for workers within America versus how he supported Israel undyingly during this genocide. And so I think many people are facing an impossible decision. I think many people will not cast a ballot for U.S. president. And I think they'll vote down ballot to ensure that Congress looks much more like their views, that we have representative representatives that will ensure that the right to abortion is codified. I think that's motivating a lot of people to go to the polls, and I think people want to ensure good legislation passes through the House and Senate, regardless of who's president. A lot's on the line locally in terms of who's running for governor and who's running for state house and state senate. And I think we're going to see a lot of people like me on the left really motivated to go to the polls, for everyone else's position other than the presidency.
All right, fair enough. Thanks for breaking that down, Jess. We're going to take a break. We'll be back. More Rising after this.
Hey.
Tech used to be the symbol of everything good, right? We were going to use tech for the benefit of humanity, but I started
The
seeing...
New York Times reported this week that the Biden campaign already has raised $1.1 billion. They're going to use it to try to keep other people off the ballot.
And you've called people out, and you have been very, very accurate in your assessment of what went wrong and why. There's no interest right now within the party on actual solutions. How are you doing?
I am great. More to the point, how are you?
It's been 3 weeks and 3 days since the announcement, and it's been wonderful. I am so proud to be part of this ticket, proud to be supporting you, proud of all the people who are working on this, aligned around this vision for a healthy America, that we can finally move past the chaos of the last 10 years, that there's hope for a new model for peace within this country and prosperity, and a new model for peace and prosperity abroad as well. And an end to using the political system in ways that it wasn't intended to be used.
I mentioned to you because we had lunch before this podcast, but I think about you all the time, about the impact of this on you, because most people who go into politics, even though I did not intend to run for president, I've spent my life thinking about politics and kind of understanding it and working in campaigns, and also understanding, over the past 16 years, how some of these issues turn your best friends against you, and cause all these kind of personal disruptions in your life. And I think about you and think, I had essentially 6 years of preparation for this, even longer, because my first convention was when I was 6 years old, at the Democratic National Convention, and I've been thinking about politics my whole life. But what would it be like for somebody who, had 1 week to think about this decision, and then was plunged into this incredible just cascade of turbulence and, hope, for embodying so much hope for so many people as you do, but also becomes the flashpoint for anger and resentment and bitterness, and then the friends who you lose, and the political alliances. And, what's that been like for you from a personal standpoint?
Overall, it's been really interesting because I mean, look at the news. Puck News just put out yesterday an article called The Shanahan Persuasion Campaign, and it outlines all the ways the DNC and people very close to me over the years have been trying to persuade me to step down from running on this ticket with you. And my experience has been 90% very positive. And again, this is one of these other signals. I've been talking about all of these signals about support or silent signals and pockets of support around the country for your campaign. And that's been my experience too, abundantly positive. And then there's about this 10% of folks that are still tied to this narrative of you have to spit hate at the other because that's how politics is done. And that 10% is super loud. They're really, really loud. And they have a strategy to them that reminds me more of being bullied in high school than it does of the sportsmanship you would expect of our political system.
That's a great word to use, sportsmanship, because there's another word that traditionally was used, and it was called comedy, which is COMITY, which is kind of a level of dignity, a kind of a baseline of respect that you give your opponent.
Yeah.
Which seems to be completely gone. And Liz Smith, who's kind of this, I don't know if I probably shouldn't call her a harpy, but that's kind of what her, my son Connor worked for Pete Buttigieg's campaign, and she was, one of the bosses, and he said that she's like, like the Darth Vader of dark politics in this country, that she's kind of an alchemist for bitterness and demonizing and vilifying people, and she's now made you her target.
Apparently, if you read this article from the Puck, they have whole pockets of people coming together to target, me specifically. And they're looking at two options, drop a nuclear bomb on her and let's just be as cruel as possible. And then there's this other pocket of people that I've worked with over the years, and they're offering me an off-ramp, like a gentle off-ramp. And I look at both options and I think to myself, it's really ironic that they're claiming the only reason I've joined this ticket is for my money. And, my response is the point of wealth is to help those in the world. And I think there's great need in America right now. And I think that your campaign represents the solution. But what's also ironic about that claim of theirs is that my sole experience over the last 5-6 years with the Democratic Party was only interest in my money. Offering $150,000 car rides with President Obama. I haven't had a real conversation with the leadership of the Democratic Party in many, many years, to the extent where I did want to support the DNC to run fair primaries. And, I asked all of my closest friends and people within the party, how do we do this? Let's get this done. Let's fix and reform the DNC. Each and every time I got routed to campaign finance for Biden. Every single time I was put on the phone call with somebody who was selling me one thing or another, a dinner party or an event, but none of it was about environmental health. None of it was about the things I care about. None of it was about issues on the economy. None of it was solutions oriented. None of it was even about what my background is, which is, AI and the innovation economy. There's no interest right now within the party on actual solutions. And I keep hearing this from, across the political spectrum here in California, is that there's these exchanges that are being made for power, and those exchanges aren't in the best interests of the constituents or the people. Again, very ironic that one of the strongest narratives they have right now is that my involvement is solely due for cash. You know, that's been the only experience I've had with the Democratic Party. They just want my money. So.
Well, that and yeah, so now you're a mercenary because you know you're selling yourself for money. But and you and I were talking this morning. Today is kind of an interesting day because there was a press conference in Pennsylvania where 5 members of my family endorse President Biden, and it's part of an orchestrated campaign that we were talking about by the DNC. I had Cesar Chavez's family come out last week against me, which is bracing because my whole life I had this me and my family this relationship with a special relationship with Cesar Chavez, and I worked personally with him for many, many years on pesticide issues, but also on elections. And with members of the family, Dolores Huerta, somebody that I grew up with, that was my hero, that was my personal friend. I had tomorrow, I'm told, 50 plus environmental leaders, including 3 former executive directors of NRDC, the organization that I spent almost 40 years at, are going to come out demanding that I step down, that I leave the race.
Yeah.
And then, you and I were talking about what we also had this situation this week where we have an attorney that works for our campaign, a brilliant attorney called Paul Rossi, he's a single practitioner, but he does election law and he's really good at it. And he's won a whole series. The DNC is attacking us in every state, trying to disqualify our ballot signatures and using all kinds of underhanded and scurrilous methods that they know are not kosher. And Paul Rossi has gone up each time and won every case. So last Friday, the DNC attorneys called him and offered him $1 million to come work for their firm and to promise him that they were going to give him Supreme Court cases and that they wanted to make him a superstar. We're seeing this all over. I told you that I read yesterday an article that Robert Reich sent out. Robert Reich's the economist. He was an advisor to my father. He was, he's a guy that I've worked with my whole life. And that he did this article saying, RFK Jr. is no RFK, and then repeating all of these, I'm anti-vax that I supposedly said the Jews caused the COVID epidemic, and all of these things that, of course, I never said, but have been attributed to me at various times. And you were telling me about your kind of dispiriting similar experience with James Carville.
Oh, yes, James Carville. So I was a huge James Carville fan as a young woman in high school and college. I saved up all of my money one summer to go and watch a show that James Carville was in with Tucker Carlson, where they debated one another on stage on political issues, called Crossfire. And so I was really saddened and really quite offended when I heard that James Carville very publicly has been going around trying to dig up personal dirt on my life and spread gossipy rumors to discredit my ability to do this job. And it's just remarkable that we are now in a political system in which sportsmanship has evaporated so much that, these strategies remind me more of Mean Girls in high school than they do constructive, democracy, right? And I think that's the heart of what this campaign is. I oftentimes tell people, I think this might be the greatest exercise in American democracy this country has ever seen. And even if you think about the path towards success, because there is a very, very clear path if you look at the way that our founding fathers structured our system of elections, you know, even if no single candidate gets to 270 electoral college votes, there's this other path within Congress. And, you know, one of the biggest debates I hear today is that, well, we don't have a parliamentary system, thus there's no space to have a third-party candidate. And if you look at all great democracies around the world, there's often three parties. Canada is a three-party system. The UK has multiple parties. You know, it's not a duopoly.
There are multiple parties.
Yeah, there are multiple parties, and they all have a voice and they have a shot. And you know, as America is maturing, it's very natural that we are in this moment in history right now. Very, very natural, and it's actually the only way forward. And so when you look at how Congress is designed to act, Congress between the House and the Senate,
You're talking about it in a contingency election.
In a contingency election. So what that means is no one presidential candidate gets to 270 electoral college votes, which is required to win the presidency in a public election. What happens next is that this vote then goes to Congress. And in that moment, the House would vote between you, President Trump, or President Biden. And that's a moment in which Congress starts to look more like a parliament, right? It's almost like this quasi-parliamentary representative system where the House gets together, they represent their districts, and then they decide who becomes the next president. As I look at this model, I think this is a very good thing. I think that this is a very good course correction for the future of this country, where we are able to change this structure of and this intensity of hate of the other around. And we realize that we live in this wonderful democracy that was designed specifically to perform in moments like this.
Let me ask you, and I think the way you said that is really interesting, and I hadn't thought about it that way as a metaphor for the parliamentary system, that we actually do have a multi-party system in this country, and but it's different than the parliamentary system, but it provides the same mechanism for electing a third-party candidate who's not part of that duopoly. Let me ask you kind of a different question, which is, how do you personally internalize that when you're being, attacked from all these people who were once your friends, your heroes? How have you been weathering that? And how do you view it? How do you look at it, in terms of your place in life, et cetera?
I had such an deep awakening over the last 2 years. The pandemic impacted me in significant ways, and I think I speak for a huge part of the population when I say I trusted the system to look out for my well-being and my family's well-being and the well-being of my community and the well-being of communities across America. And like many, I believe that we were wronged and we were deeply hurt, and we're still recovering from that. When people say that this is a one-issue platform around, health and well-being, I say, but let's unpack that issue because yes, there's this whole desire for medical freedom and informed consent, but what are we really talking about? We're talking about the very fact that censorship has occurred. Our first most important freedom in this country is freedom of speech. We're talking about the right for babies to have every opportunity to a healthy life in this country, fundamental to just our basic understanding of human rights. So when I get attacked by people that I still hold very dear, whose opinion I respect immensely, and when I get attacked publicly for being a part of this, I remind myself that I am aligned with a responsibility for everything I've gotten from being an American to make sure that that America is still available for the next generation. I am operating from a place of duty, and that is unshakable. Your desire to work on behalf of a greater power, which is what, you know, your uncle and your father represented for this country, knowing that from a place of privilege, one must go above and beyond to protect those freedoms that gave you those opportunities. And I'm like first generation American. Immigrants who have gotten here and worked their butt off, they know how precious those rights are. I know how precious those rights are. So it is worth it to put everything I have into ensuring that in this very, very special moment in history, I stand up and do the right thing. All the other stuff is noise. And I think about it the same way that I think about, you know, incentive structures. I mean, the amount of money, you know, these parties have today is so enormous. Like, this is the ultimate underdog campaign. It's really being scrapped together. And, but what makes it viable in today's environment is that there's no amount of money that can cover up some of the harms that have been caused by this duopoly and by the continuation of it. Looking at our $34 trillion deficit, we have to address it. There's no way out of this mess than just going through it with all of the smartest, brightest people around us. And that's what this campaign's attracting. The misconception I think about this campaign is that it's a ragtag team that is, you know, winging it, and that there's no real substance of you know, professionals supporting it. But that is not the case, right? Some of the smartest people from finance are part of this campaign. Some of the brightest economists are part of this campaign. Some of the brightest environmentalists are part of this campaign. And these are the environmentalists that aren't looking to geoengineering to solve our problems, but they're environmentalists who understand the deep complexity of how nature works. So, you know, to answer your question, I think that I don't feel at all like I'm putting my neck out there. I think that I'm stepping side by side and arm to arm with a movement of incredibly smart, skilled people who really, really, really want to seize this moment to course correct the path that we are on in this country.
I think that's what I thought that you would. You know, you have you've a heroic approach to life, and I wondered how you're coping with this, because it really is kind of overwhelming. And the New York Times reported this week that the Biden campaign already has raised $1.1 billion, which is more than any campaign in history, and that they're on track to raise $3 billion. And they're not going to use that money to amplify President Biden's voice. They're going to use it to try to keep other people off the ballot, or to jail his competitors. And by the way, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, so I'm running against him. But I want to win this. I want us to win this campaign on a level playing field where Americans get to choose who they want. And if they want to choose somebody who's in prison, they can do that because we're America. And we don't fix elections. We don't rig them. We don't throw people off the ballot. We trust our country. We trust democracy to land us, even in, if we don't like the candidates, we play fair.
We play fair.
Yeah, and I know that you're idealistic about this country. I know that you love this country, and are, I'm so happy that you're prepared to make that sacrifice. Somebody asked me, Glenn Beck asked me, I was in Texas yesterday, and he asked me, how I weather these things, how I internalize it. And I said to him that every person that I've admired throughout my life in reading history and reading the lives of the saints and reading, my father, who was a great military historian who lectured us on, who took us to all the great battlefields of the Civil War, the Revolution, who talked to us at night about the Peloponnesian Wars and, the battles that changed history and the leaders that changed history. Every person that I've admired in my lifetime has gone through some kind of, dark night of the soul where they're alone, where they're isolated, where the world turns against them, where their friends betray them and turn against them. And that, I've always understood that that's part of achieving something that's worthwhile. If it's easy, everybody would be doing it, and it wouldn't be meaningful. The things that are meaningful are the things that you have to fight for, that you have to endure hardship and deprivation and betrayal and denunciation of society. And, whether it's scientists or the great explorers, all of them did that. I remember reading the Bhagavad Gita, where one of the great sort of heroes of that, which is the great Bible, the great book of Hinduism. One of the heroes is Arjuna. And the centerpiece of the book is the great battle between these, a great civil war that takes place in what we now call India. And Arjuna is kind of the warrior prince on one side, and he discovers as he walks the battlefield that all his relatives are on the other side, his aunts, his uncles, his cousins, his brothers. And his charioteer is the god Krishna, who's disguised as a human, but who always gives him wise counsel. And Arjuna says to Krishna, I can't fight this war. I can't fight against my own family. It would be morally wrong to do that. And Krishna says to him at one point, everybody here is already dead. I've killed them all. And he said, your job is your dharma. In other words, your duty, which is the word you use, is to engage in battle. You are a warrior. You are here, put here to fight, and to fight for things that you believe in, and you know what's right in this case. You have to fight about it no matter what the consequences. And we all know, that a lot of times we make decisions in life that hurt people that we love, but it doesn't mean they're the wrong decisions. A lot of times you make the correct decision, and it's harmful to people, it's hurtful, it's painful. But once you decide what the right course is, then the only question is, do you have the strength and the fortitude and the, determination to do that? And I'm so happy to be in the foxhole with you, Nicole, because I've seen your courage from the very beginning, that all of these forces that are now $3 billion worth of money that is available to persuade you to abandon this course. And, it doesn't seem to even occur to you to do that.
The thing that I've been trying to make clear is that even before I found your campaign, I had begun the process of abandoning a cultural system that puts profits over people. You know, I had been in Silicon Valley since 2010 working, and I've been working in tech since 2005. And tech used to be the symbol of everything good, right? We were going to use tech for the benefit of humanity. It would be so egalitarian.
To democratize information.
It would democratize information. It was such a powerful tool. It was a powerful tool in my life. It was how I figured out how to apply to colleges, and I could do it all by myself on the internet. And I didn't need a parent guiding me or a mentor guiding me. I could do it independently. So that sense of agency was so powerful. And then, something happened. I can't tell you precisely the moment, but I started seeing tech become the symbol of insane power and wealth and ego. And I could see the leadership of tech pulling further and further and further away
from the ideals. Because we were all sold on this. Mark Zuckerberg promised that it would be the agency, the instrument of peace, of democracy, of effectiveness, discourse,
freedom,
everything, freedom and empowerment of poor communities and everybody else. And then we, woke up one day, particularly during COVID, and it become the instrument for totalitarian control, this very kind of dark force and metamorphosized in front of us. And we're like, holy cow, this is like, it's like a mythology when the beautiful woman turns into a monster, right when you're kissing her.
Right. And I socially was embedded in that whole world, right? Like I socially was, being invited to the big parties, which was this immersion of like very powerful figures like Jeffrey Katzenberg in Hollywood meshing with, all of the tech leadership in the area. And it became culturally very, very different than the, tech world that I came up in. The tech world that I came up in was, 5 or 6 people with their computers sitting in a room dreaming about a better future and working super hard to construct these systems that would reduce...
creating companies in garages.
Yes.
And, kids who just graduated high school and, in this beautiful, entrepreneurial and democratizing force.
Yeah. And I woke up one day and that was not where I was anymore. I woke up one day and I saw more interest in yachts and party invites and, profitable venture capital portfolios. And quite frankly, I grew disgusted with it all. At the same time, I had realized my daughter was special needs and was suffering from all kinds of chronic illnesses. And I started putting 2 and 2 together. And I started realizing that like the environment as well that we've created through tech and engineering, which was based, I believe, originally on good intent, had actually produced an environment that was making people unwell. And so that realization paired with the fact that noticing that the culture of tech and innovation had been gutted and had become really a culture of power and glamour, it changed my entire life. So when I think about my dark moment, that moment of the soul and the spirit and that aloneness, it was actually that. So I coming into this role wasn't as big of a jump because I had actually dealt with most of the pain of detaching myself from that community about 2 years ago. I lost many people that I thought were my friends. when I turned my back on wanting to participate in that world, it was, people thought I was crazy. Why would you turn your back on, trips to Paris Fashion Week and all the things that they, that come with that kind of wealth? I turned my back on it and I started wearing Birkenstocks and tie-dye again and got back to working with my hands in the soil and doing it myself, right? Going back to not hypothesizing about how to make the world a better place from an ivory tower, which is what philanthropy has become. It's very disconnected from people. I want to go back to the people where I started. I started, low income in Oakland, wondering, how to get by day to day, dealing with a lot of the social ills of, domestic violence and violence in my community, violence against women and children, the realities of poverty. I realize it's very, very hard to effectuate any real positive social change when you're sitting in a boardroom in an ivory tower surrounded by wealthy people who have never lived that experience. So I had a big, painful learning experience as I was kind of coming out of a gilded lifestyle, which didn't feel very full of heart and spirit at all. So now stepping into this role, and even before you invited me to join you on the ticket, I had already said goodbye to most of that stuff. I had said, and people ask me about the World Economic Forum. I went once. Had you ever been to this conference? You haven't. No. It's bizarre. I went once in 2017. My ex-husband was invited to speak with Klaus on AI, and I flew out to Davos with him, was invited to all of the big dinners and these glamorous events, and there were celebrities. And on the surface, it looked like, this is great. We're trying to figure out how to bring peace to the Middle East. I went to a conference on music in Afghanistan, and these programs on their face looked very positive. Socially, though, walking around in the most exclusive rooms, you get this sense of something's not right here. The way that people are engaging with one another isn't based on like a deep personal connection of like, I hear you, I know your story, I respect you. This is, deeply about how we combine our gifts as individuals to make this world a better place. It didn't feel like that at all. It felt like leverage. How do I use leverage to get this, to get that? And that energy of, exchanging what is a human experience for leverage and power, which is a construct, didn't sit right with me, because that exchange, if you think about it just spiritually, for example, doesn't result in the kind of sustainable, benefit of all, constructive deal making, right? It results in short-term gains of here's leverage for leverage. So I think when we talk about like the spirit of this movement, the spirit of like how we get out of this mess of short-term gains of leverage for leverage, we have to go back to what is really at its most simplest form, the basic needs of the human and the spirit and the mind, right? Like this trifecta of our being. Have you at all, Bobby, noticed that in your time watching politics over the years? How did we get so far from caring about American values? Has it just been this incremental exchange of leverage for more power and money? Or is there something, am I missing something? Is it as simple as that? Or because the return to going back to our roots and our values in America is going to force us to remember how much we've lost as well.
Yeah, I mean, my sort of, I feel like I had a front row view on that devolution of values, and it occurred to me through the steady erosion of the institutions of government and the institutions of democracy, the press, the courts, the regulatory institutions, the courts less than the other ones, but the courts were deeply affected too, Congress, the presidency, the political parties, which all essentially became the instruments of corporate control. And, there were a couple of milestones that you can look at. One would be the Citizens United case in 2008, which was a case, we did lose our democracy earlier on in American history in the 1880s and 1890s during a period that is called the Gilded Age, because it was a period when our country came under the control of a gilded class, the Rockefeller, what we call the robber barons today, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Fricks, the Whitneys, and the Morgans, a few other families that controlled most of American business through interlocking boards that controlled these big trusts, the Sugar Trust, the Steel Trust, the Oil Trust, and so on. And they were able, this was a period of time when there was no direct election of senators in our country. So the voters did not vote for the senators. The senators were chosen by the state legislatures, and the state legislatures were completely controlled. It was very easy to buy a state legislature at that time. And that was the whole purpose of joining the state legislature, was either through raw political ambition because you thought you were going to be president one day, or it was because you could make money there. And so, it was said of the Pennsylvania state legislature that it was the only legislature that was not for sale because John D. Rockefeller owned it and he was not selling any part of it. But all of these legislatures were owned by these big robber barons and these corporate trusts, and they were picking the senators, and they were, writing the legislation, and they were protecting their interests, and they were ultimately picking the president because they control the political parties. And then you had this confluence of events, which gives me hope today, because we did restore democracy in this country. And a couple of things happened. One, we had a couple of magazines, McClure's, and that began publishing the works of this new class of journalists called muckrakers, muckraking journalists, who were going after the robber barons, who were writing exposés about John D. Rockefeller and the Whitneys. Ida Tarbell was one, Upton Sinclair, Sinclair Lewis, many, many others who were read by everybody in the country, and it had this tremendous impact. And then you had a reform movement in the cities within the Republican Party, the moderate Republicans called progressives. And in the countryside, they unified with a movement of Democrats in the countryside called Populists, which was an agrarian movement to restore democracy. And then you had one leader who came along, Teddy Roosevelt, who was part of the oligarchy. But he also had this rebellious nature that said he was not going to be controlled about it. He had ideals, very idealistic about American democracy, at least domestically. And he became president. We passed all of these extraordinary laws that restored democracy. We passed the 40-hour work week. We gave women the vote. We banned child labor. We made it legal for unions to organize. We we passed the Sherman Antitrust Act and broke up the Standard Oil Company, which was the biggest monopoly in the world. And in 1908, they passed the most important law, which was a law that made it illegal for corporations to donate to federal political candidates.
Yep.
And that law lasted for exactly 100 years. And then it was thrown out by the Citizens United case, where this very business-oriented Supreme Court said that no, it's illegal. A donation to a political candidate is a form of free speech, and therefore it's protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution, and you cannot legislate against it. And that, launched this tsunami of money, which we now see President Biden with $3 billion. And it gave control of our government to the moneyed classes. The Congress, the House, and it accelerated this devolution toward corporate control. So, and particularly in the agencies, the big industries have been struggling to control the agencies since Earth Day, since 1970, when we had this huge outpouring of, 20 million Americans came out of the street on Earth Day. The Cuyahoga River was burning. The Lake Erie caught fire. The eastern peregrine falcon went extinct. We had, an oil spill that year in '69 in Santa Barbara that closed all the public beaches in Southern California. This accumulation of insults drove 20 million Americans out of the street, the largest public demonstration in American history. And the political system responded. Republicans and Democrats got together and they passed all these environmental laws, 21 environmental laws over the next 11 years. The Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, Superfund, CERCLA, RCRA, all of these other statutes that restored the public commons to the public, so that the commons, which is the air, the water, the wildlife, the fisheries, the public lands, could no longer be privatized by corporations through the mechanism of pollution, but instead they remained in the hands of the public. And that launched, in terms, a counter-revolution by industry, which began organizing all of these groups, like the Petroleum Institute and all these other groups, to dismantle that law. And they began this slow dismantlement over the next 20 years. And I was part of that battle, watching that happen.
Yeah.
The Citizens United case just blew it up and accelerated it. And now, we find ourselves in this situation, and particularly COVID pushed us so far down that road that the American press now sees its job not to question government authority and the pronouncements of powerful officials, or rather to reinforce those, to fortify them, to be propagandists for the orthodoxies. And Congress is completely in the hands of the moneyed interests. The president is, how can you have $3 billion and not be beholden to BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street and all their sub-companies that gave you the $3 billion, and the same pharmaceutical companies, the bankers, et cetera, are running the Republican Party as well. So they really are a duopoly, and their purpose is to maintain the corporate control over our government. And, I feel like what we're doing is, a genuine American revolution where we realize that we need to topple that system because it's corrupting everything that we loved about this country. It's commoditizing our landscapes, commoditizing our soil, commoditizing our children, turning us all into these, like the drones in a beehive whose, job is just to consume, to feed themselves, and to make the wealthy and elite classes to give the power to them and to make them richer and richer with the illusion that we're hanging on to security by giving up our rights.
Yeah. The thing that has always struck me is how little accountability there's been throughout all of this. how there's no appreciation for what is being sacrificed in exchange for the gains of this small group of people. Because it's a really small group of people that we're talking about that have an enormous amount of control.
That are the beneficiaries of this.
That are the beneficiaries of this. The degree of sacrifice to me is so great that as a human who has been around that and watched it happening all around me and trying to have this conversation, how do I try? It's hard for me to understand that there's such a lack of morals in this group that they're unwilling. They would still be so vastly wealthy if they put time into looking at how, Amazon's a great example, but like if they cared more about the health and well-being of their consumers, more than their own corporate profits, I think a lot of people ask themselves the question of how do we get through to them? How do we help them find a path towards changing course? How do we come together and say, rushing into the lab to solve issues and related to like what many are calling augmentation, right? Like, how do we stop focusing on augmentation and these short-sighted gains across everything: medicine, economy, health, agriculture, geopolitics, right? How do we get away from this short-term thinking and go back to long-term focus on preservation of health and preservation of wellness? There's this fork that's happening. There's one path that says, let's engineer, let's crisis engineer everything. So that's looking at everything as like, it's too hot right now, let's engineer for rain. You have cancer, let's kill all the cancer with chemo. Obesity with Ozempic. A virus that's like a severe virus, but like, let's get it with like as many vaccines as we can get. Right? That's the path.
Yeah, let's solve the problem of droughts by building dams.
Let's solve the problem of droughts by building dams. And it's very transactional, right? And I think this is why people are frustrated with capitalism, because capitalism incentivizes this kind of behavior. But it's capitalism does a lot of good things too. So I'm very pro capitalism, especially with ethics and long-term considerations in mind. But this mode of short-term thinking has gotten us into a lot of issues. It's resulted in the chemicalization of our entire agricultural system. We know that makes us sick. And then there's this other path, right? This is a path that many of us in this campaign are all aligned on. And this other path is very much, we love the science of healthy rivers. We love what that gives to the community. Protecting, the steady population of salmon in our waterways, understanding the incredible ecological engineering that nature does all on its own. How do we participate in that, both in a capitalistic economy, but doing so that results in this analysis of, maximal long-term output and sustainability. I just heard, there's this new group of they call themselves environmentalists that are unhappy with this campaign. What are they missing right now? Because I think that we can panic engineer our way towards these short-term gains in the environment, or we can work through science to create a more resilient future for ourselves.
Yeah, and I love that idea that we can either have, which is your idea, we can either have an augmented future or we can have a future which is in concert with nature, where we recognize that we're part of it and that, and use the engineering that God gave us and evolution gave us to maximize our lives and maximize our happiness and effectiveness and abundance. And, it's an illusion. The augmented future is an illusion. It's like all, Upton Sinclair made this very useful observation that a man, it's very difficult to convince a man of a fact if the existence of that fact will diminish his salary. And so ultimately, that's just an observation that people act on perceived self-interest. And as you point out, oftentimes the perceived self-interest is short-term. And it's not, long-term. Henry Ford, who is not, who did a lot of bad things in his life, one of the really important things that he did is he paid his workers fairly. And he paid them much more, double or triple what his competitors were paying. And when he was asked, why are you paying auto workers these much higher levels of money than you pay than anybody else does, he said, I want every one of my workers to be able to afford to own one of my cars. And that, as it turns out, made him the biggest car producer in the world. I think at one point he was producing something like 70 or 80% of the automobiles in the world. And he helped create the American middle class, and that philosophy helped create the American middle class. That wealth, when it's distributed to large groups of people, continues to amplify and to serve the benefit of society. Mm-hmm. But the short-term perspective it feeds this idea of engineering solutions. And, I saw that during my years as an environmental advocate and attorney, that the engineering, the Army Corps of Engineers became the villain from my first lawsuits. We recognized that their solutions were almost always short-term. Yeah, you can engineer the Mississippi River in a way that is going to reduce annual flooding, but that annual flooding actually feeds the deltas that create the city of New Orleans. And New Orleans is now sinking, one of the great cities in our country. And Katrina was just, a symptom of the disease that has been created through the engineering of the Mississippi. So it's, they stopped the annual floods, but they also stop the accretions that hold the delta together, and the bird life and the fisheries and the city of New Orleans are all disappearing now because of that engineering solution. And I saw this again and again across the country, that all the dams that were created that helped to energize the West, that they were short-term solutions that are now the agents of drought and destruction in those landscapes. And when I switched over to human health, I saw the same thing. I saw people like Bill Gates make this argument that the only path to human health is through a syringe, and human beings have existed for very long periods of time on all these continents without that, and there was a wisdom that we seem to have forgotten about, building the human immune system and building our own capacity to fend off the bad effects of viruses and bacteria, and instead of relying on an engineering technique to do that, which has all these other costs for which the industry is not held accountable. That before you introduce vaccines, you have to pass a law that says if they kill you, if they injure you, you can't sue the company. And then you have to twist the science to make sure nobody learns about all of these other impacts. You know, what they call the adverse events, that those are disguised through a variety of mechanisms. So nobody can really make a cost-benefit analysis about whether this product is averting more problems than it's causing. And, you know, that's all obscured through data manipulation and through opaqueness and control of the medical journals. And you know, I think what you and I are trying to do is to create a revolution in this country where, you know, where real science becomes the basis of policy, and where there's transparency, where there's democracy, where science is elevated rather than money. And that, you know, the best scientists in the world are the ones who are actually involved in a courageous and existential search for truth, rather than, you know, pursuing the mercantile interests of the pharmaceutical industry or the food industry, or, you know, or processed foods, whatever. And, you know, science has been perverted, the press has been perverted, the Congress has been perverted, the entire medical industry, the hospitals. We saw, you know, the doctors during COVID, you know, really not comporting themselves in ways that actually promoted public health.
I think that most everyone in every field you just mentioned, they're not trying to hurt anyone. They want to live up to their duty. They want, like journalists want to live up to their duty of, you know, the free press. And I still meet these individuals. They're people. These are individual, you know, people with independent agency who are, you know, started their career from a place of wanting the truth. And I actually have engagements with journalists frequently that will share things with me about their own concerns about what has happened to these for-profit news platforms. But the people themselves, and this is what I want to remind everyone, every opportunity I have, is that you don't need to lose your sense of agency. You are an individual. You know, just because your organization is going one direction doesn't mean you have to too. And that's the great beauty of this country. And of course, it's made harder if, you know, you risk losing your job, or, you know, you lose, you know, income for your family. But I think that there's a lot of strength in that middle zone. And my goal for us is to reach that portion of America, those doctors who might be too afraid to speak up, and let them know that there are safe forums to do so that don't sacrifice your livelihood, right? And that's a very powerful message for us, I think, to get out right now, is that it's not all tech workers are bad, or all people of the press are doing bad things, or all doctors have let us down. Everyone was manipulated in some way or another over the last several years, and certainly during COVID. It was the greatest manipulation campaign ever in human history, likely. Where we are right now in this moment in 2024 is a real opportunity to move on with dignity, and move on with all of the things that we have done right in our careers and our lives, and get a chance to live up to the duty that we set out to live up to when we pick these jobs. In practice, I think that really looks like, you know, connect with other members in this community, right? Connect with people and have a conversation. Don't feel pressured to do what your party is doing. Don't feel pressured to do what your organization is doing. But have faith in this moment that it's okay if you made a mistake back then. Right? And I think that's the grace that we want to offer ourselves, each other. It's the grace I've given myself. I made many mistakes, trusting that the narrative being sold during COVID was honest, was an honest narrative. I was first in line for the mRNA vaccine. I vaccinated my daughter as early as possible. I believed it was what was in the best interest, because that's what I was being told by all of the quote experts at the time, because all other opinions were being censored. I now realize, but here we are in this moment to reset. We so desperately need to reset. And what that, I think, means is not necessarily blaming and spitting hate at everybody else. I mean, we can definitely hold people accountable. You've always done an incredible job with this, outlining, who had significant conflict of interest, who manipulated whom in that story. And you've called people out correctly. I've been going through what you've said and verifying to the best of my ability. And you have been very, very accurate in your assessment of what went wrong and why. Moving forward, we've talked about this idea of giving both parties a chance to settle their disputes, stop dragging each other through court. If you win this election, it really is the best opportunity to cool off, right? The Republican Party, those around Trump, part of the reason they're so up in arms is because the DNC has been so up in arms against them. You offer a cooling off period. 4 years of your presidency could result in probably the most important resetting of priorities across the board. How do we make this more clear to everyone that, the solution to our greatest divide is a presidency that no longer spits hate at any single group?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Even, the people in some of the corporations that I consider the worst, the majority of them are just good people. The people, hedge fund managers and bankers and people in the, who work for Peabody Coal and Massey Coal and Consul. Most of them see themselves as good people. They live moral lives. They're trying to raise their families. They're trying to create employment. And I think we have to acknowledge that, and we have to avoid demonizing people. We do hold people accountable, but in ways that are positive and that we can go forward. I think the key thing that you and I need to do as soon as we get into office is to stop all the lying. Prior to when my uncle was president, 80% of the American people believed that the government always told them the truth. And we need to get back to that. And we're not going to get back to that by telling people that the government is telling you the truth and gaslighting them. We need to acknowledge that today, almost everything the government tells us is a lie. And it's manipulated information. It's never exactly the truth. And that we need to end that. We need to just, and we can do that through executive orders. We can do it through cultural changes at the agency. We can do it through personnel changes and in many, many other ways. But we're going to do that, and we're going to do it by setting an example to Americans of we're going to tell the truth now. And then we're going to try to debate policy in a way that's civil. And that is not, filled with vituperation and acrimony and vilification and demonization. And, I think we can dramatically change the direction of our country. We're going to go through crises. And we could hit very grave crises, the debt crisis. It's hard to see, and you and I spent a lot of time talking about it today, about how do we get out of that. And it's not a clear path, but America has the resilience. How do we get out of the soil and the food crisis? How do we get out of the chronic disease crisis?
And geopolitical crises.
All of these things. But, we can do it if we work together. We have America has done, the worst at destroying its soils, and our agricultural policy is the worst in the world. We have 1,000 ingredients now in our food that are illegal in Europe. We have the sickest people in the world, but we have the best doctors in this country. And that's not saying that is not, you get these politicians up there all the time and say America has the best of this, the best of this. We actually do have the best people in regenerative agriculture in this country, the most innovative farming techniques, people who are revolutionizing agriculture. It's happening here. People who are doctors, physicians who are revolutionizing medicine, regenerative or functional medicine, integrative medicine. It's happening here. It's happening elsewhere too, but they're nothing like what is happening in this country. We have the best entrepreneurs in this country. We have the highest concentration of entrepreneurial activity of any nation in the world, and everybody recognizes that. So we have the path out of these crises, and we have the national character to be able to of resilience. But we need to give those assets a chance to blossom and to put down roots, to grow, and we need to encourage them and incentivize them and reward them. And, we start doing that by just telling the truth and being honest and then talking to people and respecting different points of view. And setting a course through collaborative democracy. Yeah. Anyway, I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk to you, and I look forward to many more conversations like this in the future. Once government takes power, it's going to abuse it, and it will never relinquish it.
So this is my weird obsession, warm fuzzy socks, because I feel like then everybody chills out. This isn't a normal TV set, right? Are you willing or no? Are you going to take the dive on a pair of socks?
No, I mean,
there's some fun choices.
I have chronically hot feet, so I go barefoot whenever.
You do?
Yeah, I'm happy to take my shoes off, but I'd probably go barefoot rather than put on the socks.
Well, I won't force you.
I got in trouble, in this campaign for going barefoot on an airplane.
Give me a break.
Oh, that was a big scandal so far.
Yeah, well, listen, if that's the worst scandal, we're okay, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to, full transparency here, because why not? First of all, my mission in my second chapter of my career/life is about the human beings and people, not necessarily your resume, or if you're an athlete, your statistics, or even policies, because to me, it starts here. So I want to preface with that because I want to get to some of the political things, frankly, and the topics and the issues that are so important towards the end. But this to me is, it starts with when people say, okay, when you vote, some people vote with such emotion. And quite often because I think we tie ourselves to a candidate based on their morals and values and the human side. And then I found, my goodness, half these people are terrible human beings, So forget it. If I focus on that, then I'm not going to vote for anybody. So I'll just stick with the policy. That's just easier and safer, and that's what will help our country and make our country better. However, you're here, and I am dying to get to know a little bit more about the human being. That's where it all starts. That's where it ends, right? Everything else is in the middle. That said, when you think back on your entire life and going back to even your childhood, when did you when did you know that you were different? That you were a Kennedy? Like that's royalty, as that word has probably been thrown around so much your whole life. But it's a different childhood than mine, for sure, as an Army kid, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very lucky to have the childhood that I did. There was a lot of love in my family. I grew up in a very, very big family. When I was 6 years old when my uncle was elected president. I went to the convention. It was the first time that I had stayed up all night in Los Angeles. I flew back on the plane next to my uncle, and there's these wonderful pictures of me talking to him as a 6-year-old boy. He sent me a copy of one of those pictures where he's listening intently to me as I kind of gesticulate. And he said a president gets his advice from many different people. But the campaign absorbed our lives.
Yeah.
And when he was elected, it was, our house became a summer White House at the Cape. And then the house that I grew up in Virginia, my father was the Attorney General. And on Friday afternoons, 3 helicopters landed on the football field next to our lawn. My grandfather had a big football field where all the kids, where his kids grew up playing. And 3 Marine helicopters would land, and all of my uncles, my uncle Steve Smith was the chief of staff. My uncle Sarge Shriver was the head of the Peace Corps. My uncle Ted Kennedy was in the Senate already by that time. My father was the Attorney General, and then my Uncle Jack was the president, and they would all get off those airplanes. They would go up onto the porch of my grandfather's house and kiss him. And he was almost the first year after my uncle was elected, he had a stroke that kept him in a wheelchair. And then they'd come up every Friday, they'd stay for the weekend, and then they'd fly off on Sundays. And they'd bring with them very exciting house guests, and it was just tremendous excitement in our family. And then, of course, my uncle was killed in 1963. That was devastating for my family. My father was shattered by that, and it took him some time to recover. But by 1964, he was back on his feet again, and he ran for United States Senate. And my father, during that period, went through a kind of, I would say, a psychic realignment. As he tried to make sense, because he had this very kind of, I would say, black and white view that, that if you behaved well, if you did the right thing, that God was going to take care of you and you would have a good life. And that when his brother was killed, all of those notions, those simplistic notions about how the universe functions were shattered.
Yeah.
My father gave me a book about 2 weeks before he died called The Plague by Camus. And my father said when he handed me this book, he gave it to me with a particular intensity, and he said, I want you to read this. So after he died, and I was trying to make my own sense of the world and my relationship with him, I read that book several times to try to kind of discern what lock that key would open. And the book is about a doctor in a plague-ridden city in North Africa that is under quarantine. Mm-hmm. And you don't even ever learn what the plague is, and they don't really know. They just know it's killing huge numbers of people and that it's extremely contagious. And most of the book takes place a conversation by a doctor who is locked in his apartment and is trying to make a decision about whether to go out and help people. And he has no idea how to treat this plague. Nobody does. Everybody seems to be dying. He understands that if he stays in his apartment, he's likely to live. If he leaves to help people, he's highly likely to die. And in the end, he makes the decision to go out and to console people, even if he can't save them, because that's his duty, that's his function. You know what the Stoic philosophy was? It was that all of us has a duty to subject ourselves to intense self-examination, our motives, to move away passions, prejudices, and try to make the determination of what ethical conduct is in every situation. What is the next right thing? No matter how it costs you, no matter whether the world condemns you, if once you determine what is the ethical path, you march that path no matter what. And
but you're a kid when so much had taken place, so many heavy things, traumas had taken place, and so your uncle and then your father. I mean, were you even able at such a young age to start to self-reflect and examine how you were going to handle the one thing you can control, right? Your reaction. I mean, you were...
Yeah, I mean, no, I would say no, I was not in any condition to do that. And, you know, what I ended up doing is within a year after my dad's death, I was addicted to heroin. Yeah. So that was kind of... And I'm not saying that that's what caused my addiction, in many ways, I believe that I was born an addict. You know, I had that, I feel like I was born with empty spaces inside of me that my inclination was to fill with things that were outside of me.
So born with that, and then you
I
add
feel
on.
that way, but who knows?
Yeah.
You know, who knows? You know, and I've been in recovery for 40 years. So I go to a meeting every day. And
Every day?
Every day. And I hear people's stories every day. And if you go to those meetings, half the people think that they were born with addiction. Half of them think they acquired it. And it may be that they're genetic. There's probably genetic codes that provide vulnerabilities, but that, the way that we're nurtured, the way that that we walk through the landscapes of life also may change our behavior in various ways. What we do know is that once you become an addict, you can never go back. You're now an addict for life, and that you have to do something else besides just say, "I'm not going to be." Once you're a pickle, you can't go back to being a cucumber. Mm-hmm. So whether it's acquired or whether it is natal is kind of irrelevant. And I can't tell you for me. I can tell you that, again, within a year of my dad's death, I was doing drugs, and I was addicted for 14 years. So I quit when I was 28 years old, and during that period, when I was in early recovery, is when all of these things started to make sense to me, and all of the books that I had read, my Catholic upbringing, all of this confluence of philosophy and theology and self-examination and pain that you go through. Mm-hmm. We grow through pain. Pain is ultimately the touchstone of spiritual growth. And, addicts have a unique opportunity for redemption because they've been to hell. And, I was able, during that period, I was lucky enough to be able to synthesize a lot of these lessons that I'd learned that were probably incoherent to me earlier.
Yeah.
But they all started falling together when I was in recovery.
I wish that first of all, I've never been an addict myself, but one of the people in my life that I love the most, a family member, like you said, once an addict, always an addict, but he also was a heroin addict for about a decade. I don't know that...
And then what happened?
And then he made a choice. He made a decision to...
So he went into recovery.
He did go into recovery, and he's doing well. I think that unless you have done it or know someone close to you that's been through that in particular, especially with heroin, there's no way to fully comprehend the hell that you were in. And,
well, I think most people these days, unfortunately, do know somebody who is struggling with addiction.
I totally agree, yes. But I think to fully understand by someone who is part of me, what it does to your, yes, physically, but your core, your soul. That to me is like one of the few drugs that it's shocking to me that so many, it's actually not a huge number, are able to overcome heroin in particular because of the addictive qualities of it. We know what it does. What was your low point during those 14 years? That is a hell of a long time to be struggling with that drug in particular. Was there one low point?
No, I mean, everybody who's addicted goes through various kind of stages of pain and humiliation, and so all of those things happened to me. But a lot of it was fun. I mean,
it's a party.
I mean, for me, when I was a kid, I think I was born with ADHD, and back then they weren't diagnosing it. You were just, but I was, I was bouncing off walls and I did so poorly at school. I found some report cards about, 10 years ago when my mom sold Hickory Hill, which was a house that I grew up in, and we all ended up sort of getting our high school papers and all that stuff back. And I was reading my elementary school report cards, and they were, literally one of the priests said, he is not only the worst student in this class, he's the worst student I've ever had. And I know why, because I was completely non-compos mentis. It was just like, I feel like I was a dog, how when you're talking to a dog and they know their name, but nothing else. I could hear the kind of blah, blah, blah. But I was thinking all the time, how do I get out of this classroom and get into the woods and, turning over rocks and catching snakes? That's the only thing that I wanted to do, and climbing trees. And as soon as the bell rang, I was off into the woods with my brothers.
By the way, did you ever know the teachers thought that about you? Was that hidden from you?
Oh, yeah, I knew I was a problem student. But
those are strong words, though.
When I started taking heroin, I went from the worst kid in my class to the first, second, and third academically in my class for the rest of my career.
What?
So, because it calmed me down. It made me so that I could sit still, which I could not sit still. My brain was in turmoil all the time. And I had, I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't sit still and read. And all of a sudden, so I feel like I was self-medicating. And back then they didn't give you Adderall and stuff. And it was my Adderall. I was, I could sit, I could write, I could read, I could comprehend. I had, and I was functional on it.
So you felt smarter on heroin. It was a fun party. Like it's 14 years. So why stop?
Well, that's the thing. Is it does, if it kept working, I'd still be doing it. But it not only stops working, and of course you need more and more of it to work, but also it destroys your life, and it destroys your relationships, and it hurts everybody that you love, and it makes you into a liar, and it forces, whenever you're living against conscience, which you're doing if you're addicted, you push God over the periphery of your horizon. So there is a complete disconnection, and you become. I feel like I was like a one-dimensional human being. That I was a collection of appetites that needed to be fed all the time, and that becomes a full-time job. There was, all of these needs that I had, whether they were sex or drugs or alcohol or extreme behavior or whatever, and that they were constantly demanding to be fed, and that was my full-time occupation, and it's very, very time-consuming. And there's no time for self-reflection. I mean, there's no there's no authentic self-reflection.
Right.
You know, you can still have big thoughts and you can, you know, perform intellectually, and I could try cases and, you know, graduate law school and get all jobs because I was not, you know, I wasn't like nodding out, you know, drug addict, but I was on you know.
High functioning. I mean,
I was pretty high functioning,
Yeah.
and but it was destroying my life. And I was, like I said, I was a one-dimensional person. And when I finally got sober, I came in, you know, with my life wrecked, and I came in on my knees, and I made the decision. I knew I needed a spiritual realignment. I did not want to be back when I was arrested in 1983 in September. Everybody now knew I was a drug addict, so I could now go get help. You know, because before that, I was not going to go into a 12-step meeting. And
did you want to, but you were afraid that...
I did. I tried constantly to stop. I tried earnestly, sincerely, honestly to stop. You know, the most demoralizing feature of addiction for me was my incapacity to keep contracts with myself. Oh, I would tell myself at 9 o'clock in the morning, I am never going to do that again. And by the way, I had iron willpower in other parts of my life. And I gave up candy for Lent when I was 13. I never ate candy again until I was in college. I gave up desserts when I was 14, and I never ate another dessert till I was a freshman. I was doing sport, you know, I was playing rugby.
Can you help me with that? Like, it's my biggest struggle in life. I have to have dessert 3 times a day. That's amazing. So in that aspect, you're able to do it,
I
but
felt
not...
like I had iron willpower. I could do anything with my
amazing.
willpower, but somehow this compulsion, this one compulsion, was completely impervious to any act of will that I had against it. I would tell myself at 9 in the morning, I'm never going to do that again, and I would believe it and be committed to it. And at 4 o'clock, I'd be doing it. And the guy I was at 9 o'clock had no capacity to bind that person that I was going to be at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and that is completely demoralizing. So, you know, so when I did get arrested, I now had the opportunity to go do things. Because of my name, I was not going to walk into a 12-step meeting full of strangers and say I'm a drug addict. It just would have been it would have seemed suicidal to do that, because anytime I shared anything with anybody, it would get in the papers. So I wasn't going to do that. But now I could do it, and I knew I was very, let's say, purposeful and intentional. I wanted to stop. I was determined I would never take any drug again, and but I didn't want to be out on the street, like wanting to take drugs and then white knuckling it and struggling against the impulse. I wanted to be the kind of person who would who would wake up in the morning and just never be thinking of drugs. And, you know, kiss my wife, hug the kids, go to work, have just a normal life, and not be thinking about drugs all the time. I didn't want to be that person.
Did that arrest save you then? I mean, it sounds like that was your turning point.
But over, in the 40 years since then, I've brought many people into recovery. And then, tried to recruit many more who didn't come and who died or are still out there. A couple of times people have said to me, oh, I don't want to go to that program because it's going to brainwash me. And at this point in my life, if somebody had said, you can go to a place and get brainwashed so that you'll never want to take drugs again, I would have said, bring it on. My brain needed washing, and I wanted it. I wanted this alignment. Now, I knew, because we read the Lives of the Saints every night, and I knew that, particularly with some of my favorite saints, they were people who had led these very debauched lives. Like St. Francis of Assisi was, kind of a rake and a drinker and a party guy until, he had his moment of conversion. And St. Augustine was, what they would call in that era a whoremonger. He was living in a bordello. He was drinking. His mother was Saint Monica, for whom Santa Monica is named. She prayed for him for 30 years, and then he had this sudden conversion. He didn't want to take. He didn't want any of that anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, it wasn't a daily struggle for them after that. They just had changed who they were at this. It had these profound spiritual realignments. And I had a friend who was the best friend of my little brother, David. And David died of this disease. And this kid used to take drugs the same way that I did and that David did, with injecting heroin and cocaine and all these drugs, and with the same enthusiasm and compulsion. But he became a Mooney. He joined the Unification Church, and he became a follower of Reverend Sun Myung Moon. And he didn't want to take drugs anymore after that. And he would still hang out with us, but he would just chatter about his newfound revelations and his new religion. And we could take drugs right from it. He just didn't want them. He was completely. And I used to think about him when I was in, when I first got sober, and I would say, this is what I'd say to myself then, which was very judgmental. I'm going to tell you now, but I would say I'd rather be dead than be a Mooney. But I wish there was some way that I could distill whatever power that gave him, that made him impervious to this compulsion, without becoming a religious nuisance. And then I picked up this book by Carl Jung called Synchronicity, and it was a kind of synchronicity that it was sitting on a table. And the reason I picked it up was because there was an album by The Police that had just been released, and it had the same name, and I didn't know what the word was. So I picked it up out of curiosity. And synchronicity is a coincidence. It's like one of those things that happens to all of us when we start noticing them. It happens more often. But like, if an example would be you're talking about somebody who you haven't seen or thought about in 20 years. And the phone rings, and it's that person on the phone. And these little things happen to us all the time, right? And Jung saw those as those incidents as interventions by God, who would reach through, the universe and break all of his own rules, the rules of mathematics, arithmetic, of percentages, of chance, of biology, and of time and space, would reach through and do these little things to touch us on the shoulder and kind of say, I'm here, you're looking at a miracle. And Jung tells a story in that book where he's sitting in he ran the biggest sanitarium in Europe. It was in Zurich. And and by the way, Jung was one of the fathers of psychiatry. He had been Freud was his mentor. But Freud was an atheist, avowed atheist, whereas Jung was a deeply spiritual man. Jung began having these very authentic spiritual experiences when he was a kid. And he has another book. I wouldn't recommend anybody read the book Synchronicity, but his book, which is called Memories, Dreams, and something else, but it's his biography that he wrote when he was, I think, 85, is riveting. And, he remembers the dreams that he had. And these synchronicities, other authentic spiritual experiences that kind of guided his life in this extraordinary way. His father was a preacher, and his father was very good at what he did in terms of being able to recite the sort of consensual orthodoxies of the time, but he never had any authentic spiritual experience. It was all dry to him. He was good at articulating it and inspiring people, but he never felt it himself, and he died. at the end of his life, he died miserable, and he had lost his faith. And Young, the whole time, who was having these real experiences, was always trying to communicate with him, but his father kept him away. Anyway, Young had this experience, which he describes in this book, where he is sitting in a room with a patient. He has his back to the window. The patient, a female patient, sitting on a couch, and the patient is talking about a dream she had. And the centerpiece of that dream is a scarab beetle. And a scarab beetle is a creature that's very common in Southern Europe and Northern Africa. It's a very common symbol of iconography in the hieroglyphics on the tombs in Egypt, on the obelisks, etc. And this beetle was the fulcrum of her dream. So while he's talking to her, Young hears this bing, 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 bing on the window behind him. And he doesn't want to, it's irritating him. But he doesn't want to look around and see what it is because he doesn't want to take his attention off the patient. You know, he's scared of breaking this, bond that he has with her. But finally he gets exasperated and he turns around, he throws up in the window and a scarab beetle flies in and lands in his palm. And he turns to her and he said, "Is this what you were dreaming about?" And those kind of things happen to him a lot. And they happen to all of us, right?
Sure.
But the chances of that happening are 1 in a trillion, right? But nevertheless, it happened. It violates all the laws of nature. So Young tried to reproduce this phenomena in a clinical setting. So he would put one guy in one room and another guy in another room, and he'd have them flip cards. And he would then try to get them to guess what the other guy had flipped. And he believed that if he could beat the laws of percentages, that he would have proven the existence of a supernatural law, something that was beyond natural law, beyond nature, beyond anything that we could explain with mathematics, percentage, etc. He never succeeds in doing it. And he says that in this book. What he says is that I can't use empirical tools and scientific tools to prove the existence of a God, but that I can prove that, having seen tens of thousands of patients come through his hospital, that people who believe in God get better faster and that their recovery is more durable and enduring. And for me, reading that was much more impactful than if he had said that he had proven the existence of a God, which I would not have believed.
Right, not at that point.
What he was saying was, it's irrelevant if there's a God up there or not. If you believe in one, your chances of living a healthier life and of recovery are better. And it's an easier path. And at that point in my life, I had made a vow that I would do anything at all, if it increased my chance of recovery by even 1%. So I made an intellectual decision. I'm going to start believing in God. Now, I was raised.
You were raised Catholic. Every day.
But when you live against conscience, you push, any kind of notion of God, as I said, over the periphery of your horizon. So, God, I never disbelieved it. I never announced my belief. But it was no longer part of my, sort of daily cosmology. So, but I made a decision. I'm going to start believing in God because it's going to improve my chance of recovery. And then I'm confronted with the dilemma of how do you start believing in something that you can't see or smell or touch or taste or hear or acquire with your senses. And Young solves that problem by saying, fake it till you make it. Act as if. And he said, the compliance, the faith will precede the evidence, that there will be evidence that will be overwhelming.
When did you stop faking it? When did you fully believe that?
I'll tell you what happened to me. I immediately, while I was reading this book, I said, okay, this is the answer. So I'm just going to start pretending there's a God up there, that he's looking at me all the time, he or she. I don't care. I doubt they have a sex. It has a sex. But it's an entity that's looking at me all the time. And that life is kind of a test. And that, we're supposed to do the right thing, and I'm supposed to behave myself even when I don't have an audience, so even when nobody's watching me. So I started breaking my day down into a series of decisions that now, about 40 decisions each day now, each one has a moral implication. So when the alarm goes off in the morning, do I get immediately out of bed, or do I stay in bed with my indolent thoughts for another 20 minutes? Do I hang the towel up after I take a shower? Do I make my bed? It's the most important thing. I sleep in hotels nowadays because I'm in a different city every day. But I make my bed every morning, and which is insane.
In a hotel.
But yeah, in a hotel. But I do it anyway because I'm doing it because it's a character exercise. It's, and we're here not to build a pile for ourselves. Whoever dies with the most stuff wins. We're here to build character, which is the only thing that's enduring. So now I'm able to make commitments to myself and keep them, right? Even when I don't, even when I don't want to do it.
Can I ask you about that in particular? Because as a man of faith, and I think, and as a fellow practicing Catholic, we kind of take this path, right? And it is certainly up and down and believe or not, and question or not question. And specifically, the Kennedys we know, devout Catholics. When it comes to marriage, that's something that obviously we talked earlier. Lovely Cheryl, wife number 3. How have you handled that internally with your faith as a Catholic? And again, I'm divorced. I'm asking this a genuine question as someone who is a practicing Catholic and had some tough decisions to make, wondering, would God be mad at me? Like, what does all this mean?
Yeah,
How have you handled that with now
the suicide of my?
I'm talking just the divorce, all of that. But in this particular question, when we take it's a covenant of marriage and you vows and we decide this is for life, and then it's not, and you're married now for the 3rd time. How, as a Catholic, do you balance that in your mind and in your heart?
My relationship with God belongs to me, and it doesn't belong to, I don't have to report to, a priest or my Catholic faith.
I know, but that, like, I'm sharing that I had that internal struggle because of what I know that we believe. So was there that internal struggle with you when your first marriage ended, for example, because of how we're supposed to do things? It's one and done, and then we say, okay, we're not going to continue with this. Did you have the internal struggle?
But for me, in my first marriage, my wife is an amazing person. She was my, best friend who I married. And today we're close friends. And at that time, we did not belong married. And neither of us were happy in it. But I would have stuck with it, for these, I think, what I consider moral reasons at that time. I would have just done a forced march. And she actually had the sense to say, this is not working. I don't want to do it anymore. And at that point, I was freed because it was her choice. But she had made the right choice. And, I don't have any, I feel like you have to make your own peace with God. You find people in your life who are. The important thing in life is to not have any secrets. That doesn't mean not to have secrets. That doesn't mean that everybody you meet, you tell everything you did.
Yeah.
It means that there needs to be at least one person in your life who knows everything about you and who you have no secrets from. And, hopefully a spiritual advisor, somebody who's wise. The word wisdom means the knowledge of God's will. And somebody that you can help examine your own conduct, because we all have blind spots. I'll tell you something that happened to me.
But can I? Was there a moment of? Did you have to forgive yourself for these failed marriages, especially because of your commitment to Catholicism and your faith in the church, or was it just, hey, I know what's right and what's wrong?
Once I know what's right, I can do it without any
aside
remorse.
from what we're told to believe as Catholics.
Yeah, and that may be a contributor. the wisdom of the ages, but, why life is complicated, morality is complicated. And, I think it was Augustine who said, who was asked about right and wrong, and he said, good is what the good person does, because in some instances there is no clear cut, at some point. It may be permissible to steal, even though the Bible says don't steal. But if you're stealing from a bad person to feed a child who's already died,
right? I also believe that God, and this is something that I've thought for many things. I believe God knows our hearts and doesn't want someone living unhappily, whether it's as a couple. So that's where the balance comes in, right?
Well, all of us are required. If you want, Augustine said the unexamined life is not worth living. So, part of the adventure that we're put down here to enjoy is self-examination and rigorous, ruthless self-examination. And you can't do that alone. You need help from somebody else. And so we all, and I'll give you an example of this. When I first got sober, I had a number of people who said to me, you got a lot of anger. And I was like, I wanted to punch him in the nose, because I was like, I don't have any anger. I'm like a peacemaker. In my family, an Irish family, there's fist fights every day, but I was the peacemaker. I felt like I was the kind of guy that, if NASA was recruiting people for a long space ride and they needed everybody to get along, for decades in a little tiny capsule, that I'd be the kind of guy they recruit, because, I can get along with people. I didn't think of myself as an angry person. And then I went to take a Rorschach test, which is an ink blot test. And what they do with those ink blot tests is they have a blot of ink that is just this incoherent form. But you're supposed to say the first thing that comes to your mind when you say it. And that is supposed to reveal something about, something that you can't see in yourself, to help who's ever giving you the test understand you, because we deceive ourselves. The first thing that they showed me looked like two semicircles on either side of the crease of the paper where they'd folded the paper. And the first thing that came into my head was a memory of something I saw at the Army Medical Museum in Washington, D.C., which is part of the Smithsonian, when I was a little boy. And in that museum, they had a room where they have parts of human bodies of soldiers who've been shot or injured by shrapnel, suffered shrapnel injuries during the war, and they have a leg in one jar. They have, it's a really sort of morbid room, but it's the kind of thing that a young teenage, kid would, love to go and see. So they had a cross section of a human brain that was preserved in lucite, in a slab of lucite, and there was a seared path of a bullet going through the brain. And this figure they showed me looked like the crease of the paper was that seared path of a bullet around it, and these were the two hemispheres of the human brain. So I said, that's a bullet going through somebody's brain. And the next thing that they showed me looked like, I did a lot of taxidermy when I was a kid, and it looked like when you crack the sternum of a raccoon and open it, and the viscera pours out, and the raccoon is like nailed to a board. When you start to skin it, and I said, that's a raccoon with a cracked sternum. And each figure they showed me, I had this very, very violent imagery. And I was listening to myself. And I was saying, oh, my God, you are a really angry person. And then I realized, I got in fistfights all the time. And I did, I had, and I realized, and to me, that was just fun. But I realized that's anger. And all these people had been able to see it in me. but I was blind to it
Not
myself
yourself.
and in total denial about it. And it made me understand that I needed other people to tell me what was wrong with me. And that, I was incapable of doing an honest, thorough self-examination without the help of somebody
And
else.
this was at what age?
This was when I was 28.
Oh, this is at the end, like when you
Yeah.
were becoming sober. Mhm.
Yeah, and so, it taught me that important lesson. And I read this book by Jung, and I started breaking my, day down and trying to each moment to to make my bed in the morning, to
Yeah.
put the water in the ice tray before I put it in the freezer. When I reach into the closet and pull out a pair of blue jeans and all those little wire hangers fall on the ground, do I shut the door and say that's somebody else's job? I'm too much of a big shot, or do I go clean them up? Do I put the shopping cart where it's supposed to go?
That's a big one for me.
Yeah. So all of those things, and when you do a bunch of those things in a row, you maintain that posture of surrender, and you wake up every morning and say, "Reporting for duty,
Yes,
sir,"
it's a choice.
and then try to keep doing the next right thing. Oh, I started doing that before I finished the book, and then when the day I finished that book, I walked out on a volleyball field. And, I'd read this book about all these synchronicities, these weird things that happen. And I went out on a volleyball field. I was playing volleyball, and somebody hit the ball, on a very, very powerful punch. It went way up, and then it came down and hit the top of the post. And it made this errant flight back up again. And as it was relaunching, I said, so that everybody on the field heard me, I said, that ball is going to get hit by a Mack truck. I don't know why I said that. I have no idea, but everybody heard me say it. And the ball went up and landed on a chain link fence, and then it bounced on the other side, and it rolled down about 40 yards into a main thoroughfare. And this giant 18-wheel diesel with a little bulldog on the hood came by and hit it and popped it with just a resounding pop. And everybody looked at me for a second, or like, "Wow, how'd you do that?"
The most random thing you could have said.
Yeah, the random thing I said. Oh, at that point, I had just finished this book about synchronicity, and I was like, okay, I can either just dismiss that the way that I would as a weird coincidence, or I can just say that, this is God's way of talking to me, and I'm going to accept that, and I'm going to accept the beauty of it, and accept, the personal interest that, God would have for arranging that kind of very comical experience to.
I wish there were I wish it had happened recently, and there's an iPhone video of it actually you saying it and actually it actually happening. I have to say, we family is so much to you. We know that publicly, and certainly you've shared that today. I'm going to be honest, and I was annoyed, upset with your family recently when in Philadelphia. It's one thing to vote for a different candidate. It's another thing for the 15 people in the Kennedy family to stand on a stage at a rally for Joe Biden when they know that
6.
6. It was only 6. Okay. For a huge portion, big names, people that mean something in your life from day one, to stand on that stage publicly and endorse Joe Biden instead of you. And even if they were going to vote for Joe Biden, to go to those lengths to support him. You've said, okay, I love my family. We all have different politics. We all have different opinions. I believe you. Was there not a part of you that thought, what the heck? Why, as my family members, go to that level to say, no, I am against my brother, my cousin, etc., and with this man? That annoyed me as a human.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. It wasn't a pleasant experience for me, but here's how I look at it, which is, first of all, when my family was raised in a milieu where we argue with each other, we differ on political issues. We were raised, we debated every night at the dinner table. My father orchestrated debates, and we were taught to disagree with each other with passion, with good information, but at the same time to love each other. So, I understand why people in my family are dismayed about me running. There's 5 members of my family that have jobs with the administration or rely on them for their work. President Biden is a long-term friend of me and my family. He has a statue of my father behind him in the Oval Office. So, I see why. And my family's tied in with the DNC. I know. They don't like what I'm doing. But you asked a more personal question about how I internalize that. And what I believe is that any hardship that I encounter, I have to look at as a gift. I need to process everything as not as something that's meant to happen and that I'm meant to learn from it. And that I need to be grateful for it. That
So did it not hurt?
Everything is teaching me something, and it's there to teach me something. So I don't spend any of my life in living in resentments. If you are resentful about somebody, it's like swallowing poison and hoping someone else will die. It's corrosive. And I am very disciplined about never going there.
Isn't there a difference between resentment and hurt?
Yeah, but again, my way of processing the experience of life is to say these things ultimately are gifts for me. And every person in my life who I've admired historically, Charles Darwin to Alexander the Great to Lewis and Clark to Richard Speaks and any great St. Francis of Assisi, St. Augustine. They all went through periods in their lives where they were disparaged by friends, by family, rejected by their communities. Winston Churchill, another great example. Sure. And that if you want to do something worthwhile in your life, that you have to expect that that's what you're going to go through. And the reason that not more people are doing what I'm doing is because if it were easy, they'd do it.
Yeah.
It's difficult, and that's part of the difficulty. But I'm very disciplined about not carrying that stuff around.
I think that's the right word,
either as
discipline.
hurt or as anger.
That's beautiful.
If there's a microsecond in my head that says, "Oh, that's hurtful," I have now developed the ability to immediately change it and say that means it's good. If somebody. Listen, God is talking to you through every encounter that you have. Everybody that you meet is a messenger.
Absolutely.
And if somebody throws you the finger on a highway, you have to think to yourself, that's God. What does he want me to learn from this experience? What does he want me to do with this interaction? Does he want me to be kind? Does he want me to pray for that person?
So are you praying for your family? Are you
Yeah,
have
of
you
course,
had
of course.
I don't mean that literally, but as they are doing something that might be hurtful for a split second and then
absolutely.
And have you had conversations with them since?
Yes, I have. I mean, one of the things is that several of them have said that they've sent me notes saying we made sure not to criticize you. In an earlier iteration, some of them said a couple of things about me. But this time they said, and I told them I had dinner with my cousin Maria Shriver and one of my brothers who was there, Max, the other day, and I said, look, I really don't mind you guys doing this with, endorsing Biden, but I don't want you to be saying, and I don't think it makes you look good.
Right.
To be saying, bad things about me, and it's hurtful to my children, and, I think the whole family. So I think they made an effort not to do that. And several of them said to me that they had used those moments with President Biden to ask him to provide me Secret Service protection. And, so I'm happy with that. I think that maybe he'll, reconsider his decision.
The fact that it's even a decision and it's gotten to this point is ridiculous, which to an outsider only says, okay, you're only doing that if you are threatened by that person. Otherwise, why wouldn't you do what is traditionally done for a presidential candidate? What do you think the chances are that he does reconsider? I mean, what did they say his reaction was? I'll think about it.
No, I didn't get that far with them. They just said we asked him. Oh, I don't know.
It's been asked before, and he has said.
Yeah, I mean, I've put 5 requests into
5.
Yeah, and I'm the first candidate in history that has requested Secret Service protection since my dad's death, which is when they gave it to everybody. And there's been 44. They have to give it to you 120 days out.
Okay.
But they've given it to 44 candidates, basically everybody. 200 days, 300 days. I think Obama got it 541 days out. Jesse Jackson, people with a tiny fraction of my polling. Shirley Chisholm, Pat Buchanan, got it a year out, etc. So I'm the first one that they've ever denied it to. That's
and did they ever give you a reason?
No.
What's your gut?
They'd say, I assume that it's a political decision. I know the Secret Service told them that I was at elevated risk. There was a 68-page report that was documenting all the death threats. The people who 4 people have broken into my house since I declared one of them, a mentally ill person who got to the 2nd floor when my family was home. Another time, a man came with a lot of loaded pistols, shoulder holsters, and a backpack filled with weapons and magazines and fake U.S. Marshal ID, and tried to get into my green room and at a speech in Los Angeles with a lie. And he had fake federal enforcement agency ID. And luckily, one of my, paid guys, Gavin DeBecker, looked at that badge and said, that U.S. Marshal badge is a little too shiny. And they pulled him aside. And
so this is all being funded by you personally then? All your security is from you?
Yeah, it's being funded by my campaign, but it's a lot of money. It's like $1 million a month. And you asked me why.
$1 million a month?
Yeah. Because you have to travel with people, and you have to pay airplane, and you have to pay you have cars, at both ends, and you have to have hotels, and and it's a robust detail. So, but you asked me why I thought they were doing it, and I don't know because I can't look into their heads, but I assume they've made a decision that they would rather me spend that $1 million on, protecting myself than on advertising or field organizing or whatever. So I think it's cynical. The troubling part of it is that it's really the first time since Nixon that a president has politicized the U.S. enforcement agencies. And we're seeing this not just with the Secret Service, but the CIA, the FBI, CISA, NIH, which were all, I won a lawsuit against President Biden called Kennedy versus Biden. I went to the U.S. Federal Court of Appeals that enjoined him from censoring me. And, 37 hours after he took the oath of office to uphold the Constitution, there were individuals in his White House were contacting Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Google, and asking them to take down my accounts. And threatening them that if they didn't do that, there's going to be antitrust issues and that they would lose their Section 230 immunity. So that's, that has not been done before. And it's very, very dangerous precedent. And everybody, people might say, well, Joe Biden, he will never, he's a nice guy. He won't abuse those powers. But, once government takes a power, it's going to abuse it, and it will never relinquish it.
Well, and that's that's obviously one of the big problems. One of the reasons why you are here running a campaign and spending a minimum of $1 million of your own money and campaign money every single month because of what has happened with our government, and frankly, what has not happened. I just want to go through a couple of items real quick, a couple of these issues, because sometimes it depends on which medium people are reading, watching, listening to get the information. First and foremost right now, and I don't know, I guess it's debatable the order of importance, but what's happening in Israel and Palestine, and obviously atrocities on both sides. So if you're in office now, you're doing what with that real disaster that's happening now?
Well, I'm very anti-war, and I've been very outspoken about the Ukraine conflict, which I think is a conflict of choice, and it's a conflict we should have never gotten into. That as many as 600,000 Ukrainian kids have died unnecessarily, and that's been sold to the American public on a series of pretexts that are just not true. Yeah. And I'm not excusing Vladimir Putin's invasion, but Americans need to understand the provocation and the opportunities that we've had to settle that war. I'm anti-war, I think, but there are wars that are moral wars, and those are wars that I think in the last century, America, in a dozen wars that we've been into, only one of them would qualify as a moral war, and that would be World War II. World War I was not. My grandfather protested it and lost a lot of his friendships and said at the outset, this is a war for bankers, it's a war for munitions manufacturers, for arms dealers, and it's a war to preserve the imperial nations and the colonists, the colonial powers. World War II was a just war. We were attacked. We were responding to an implacable enemy that was pledged to the destruction of Western civilization and had the ability to do it. I think Israel's war is a just war. It's a moral war. And I'm very, very pro-Palestinian. I'm heartbroken by the civilian deaths in Palestine, but I don't think we should be pointing at Israel. We should be pointing at Hamas.
At the border, what are you, if you're in office today? And again, it's inheriting things. Every person that comes in.
I would shut down the border.
You would have shut it down?
I would shut it down overnight. You can't have a country if it doesn't have secure borders.
Why has, in your mind, Joe Biden continuously said, I don't have the power to do that?
He has the power to do that.
Of course he does.
Yeah.
Why has he not, in your opinion?
Well, I don't answer the why questions that require me to look into other people's minds. Like I didn't answer, why is he denying me Secret Service protection? I'd say I could think of a reason he might.
I respect that. What might a reason be? Because as a normal citizen, I'm not a politician. You're looking from the outside, and I see us suffering.
Yeah, I mean, what he says is wrong, that he does have the power to stop it. He does not need legislation. He can stop it. There's a number of things that he can be doing right now that I will do immediately when I'm elected to stop it. And there's basically three things he needs to do. There are the infrastructure issues. They need to finish those last 27 holes in the wall. You don't need a wall from Brownsville, Texas, 2,200 miles to San Diego.
But basically what Trump was doing was the right thing. You'd agree?
Yeah. And I would revive the Migrant Protection Act. That is the rule that requires people seeking asylum who come in through Mexico to make their application from Mexico, process their claims there, and before they come through. And then also I'd end the catch and release program, and I'd reinstate the catch and return program. And then they also need personnel. They need enough Border Patrol. And they need asylum court judges. But we could end it. There's a lot of other things that we can do. but we could end it. If you ask me, you know, what are the reasons that the administration is doing it, I would say the most parsimonious reason, I think, is just political pettiness, is that, you know, I know that that's happening because there are these gaps in the fence and there's huge piles, you know, that were supposed to be completed, and there's huge piles of construction material next to them that has been now abandoned for 3.5 years. And it's a very easy thing to finish those fence lines. And they were, the fence was called off the day that President Biden came in. They stopped construction. And then, you know, Secretary Mayorkas has been, you know, the Border Patrol, the head of the Border Patrol at that time, Chris Clem, has told me exactly what happened with his conversations with Mayorkas. And they were pleading with Mayorkas. Mayorkas finally came down, saw the tsunami of people coming through that I've witnessed now repeatedly. I've been down, you know, every time I've been down there. And Mayorkas recognized, yeah, we got to finish the fences in these areas. But he said, I don't want to use Trump's material. And so they ordered new material, and it's much less robust.
I'm sure it was free. I'm sure it cost nothing.
No, of course. It costs tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. Sure. And that's just pettiness, because he wanted a different color, and he wanted to show this is Biden's fence and this is Trump's fence, and it's not, you know, it's not admirable behavior.
At the end of the day, I think that's the frustrating thing is Americans want someone who is in it for the right reason. And there's always going to be things and parts of things that are political, certainly. But at the end of the day, what's the right thing for the American people? And that is, you're saying, overnight, you could at least stop the chaos by closing the border immediately, if in office. Can you clarify, and forgive me for using that word, again, it depends on what you've read, what we've heard over the last, let's just say, year. Your stance on abortion is what?
I've been probably arguably one of the leading people in this country for medical freedom and for bodily autonomy.
Yeah.
So, and I think with abortion, every abortion is a tragedy. Many of them leave permanent trauma on the woman. But I think ultimately, I don't trust government to have jurisdiction over people's bodies. And I think we need to leave it to the woman, her pastor, and to, her spiritual advisors or her physician, whatever, to make those decisions. I have to say this, that I have a plan that we've published, which is called More Choice and Fewer Abortions. And, that plan, something like close to 60% of abortions are among women who make the decision for economic reasons. And I think we need to do everything we can to make sure that women who want to bring their babies to term and are scared of not being able to afford them, that is never a consideration.
There are so many. I love that there's so many opportunities in Catholic Charities. I mean, there's so many opportunities for women to make other choices. And sometimes it's just about them knowing and just about the education part of it.
It's also about child care.
Of course, but the finances always play a role in it. And you try to have a heart and not judge from afar, because no one understands what it's like when you're in those shoes. Should there be a limit? Or you're saying all the way up through full term, a woman has a right to have an abortion?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any woman ever in history has said, I'm going to have a baby, I'm going to get pregnant and carry that baby to 8 months of term, and then I'm going to terminate the pregnancy. I don't think anybody wants to do that.
That has happened too many times to count, though, where these
I'm sure it has happened. I would say in almost all those cases, there's extenuating circumstances.
But who knows? But I mean, especially when there's drugs involved and people aren't thinking clearly, at the end of the day, it is happening.
What I'm saying is I don't think any woman sets out saying, I'm going to carry a baby for 8 months and then abort him.
Sure, but they could change their mind at 8 months, and this is what
Exactly,
we've seen. So
and I
should they
think
be
when that
allowed to do it
happened-
full term?
Yeah. So again, I respect people who, I think there's a very, very good argument, not just a compelling argument, that the state has a interest in protecting a fully formed fetus. I absolutely think that that argument is very convincing. But again, I come down to the fact that I don't trust the state, and I think we need to trust the woman. And I don't think that that's a satisfactory outcome, because there's always going to be instances where bad things happen.
They're all, yes, we can't prevent
Either
that.
way, there's going to be bad things.
But so
that
to leave,
happen.
so in other words, keeping it as is with Roe versus Wade having been overturned and leaving it up to the states to determine if and when a woman can have an abortion?
No, I wouldn't leave it to the states.
You wouldn't, right?
No, I would.
You would say completely, it's up to the
my
woman.
belief is we should leave it to the woman. We shouldn't have government involved,
even if it's full term.
even if it's full term.
Okay, and I think that's what I wanted to clarify, because there are especially people in the middle trying to determine which way we go, and some people are one topic voters, correct? But with this issue in particular, it's a tough one, and I know there's no simple answer. And as a Catholic, that definitely is something that is a concern with many practicing Catholics, that it would be okay to allow a woman to do that.
I don't think it's ever okay.
It would be
I think-
allowed. It would be allowed.
I think we have to leave it to the woman rather than the state.
Okay.
So I think we should do everything in our power to make sure that never happens, and everything that we can do. And but I think ultimately, nobody sets out to do that, and there are always some kind of extenuating circumstances that would make a mother make that kind of choice, a terrible, terrible choice, which is, you can't overstate how bad that is. And I think, ultimately, we have to trust women.
Mm-hmm. So, of all of these issues, and there's so many, the number one issue for you right now, and this is the end of April, early May of 2024, as an American, not just a man who's running for president of the United States, it's the number one issue, the number one concern for you as an American.
I would say, the number one issue, unraveling the war machine, making sure our kids can take advantage of the economy, controlling AI, which I think is existential, dealing with a $34 trillion budget deficit. All of these are existential to me. The issue that floats to the very top is the chronic disease epidemic in our children. The fact that when my uncle was president, there was only 6% of American children had chronic disease, and today 60% do. And it's hard to find a child today who's not affected. It's almost impossible. And, when I was a kid, a typical pediatrician would see one case of diabetes during his lifetime. And today, 1 out of every 3 kids who walks in his office door is pre-diabetic or diabetic. Autism has gone from 1 in 10,000 in my generation today. 70-year-old men, 1 in 10,000 of us have his full-blown autism. In my kids' generation, it's 1 in every 34, 1 in every 22 boys. And then the cost of that is $1 trillion a year. The cost of treating diabetes now bigger than our defense budget. And you add them all up, it's $4.3 trillion a year, 5 times our defense budget. We can't survive as a nation with this, and we're the only nation in the world that has anything like this.
Yeah.
And we're mass poisoning our children, and then the medical system is collapsing because of that. The budget is being drowned because of it,
I'm so grateful for you, obviously, your stance on COVID. And I know that that's one of the reasons why you said, let me go try to help because of what happened during the pandemic. And I'm so grateful for your stance. I got in trouble with Disney, my former employer, for saying, no, why are you mandating this? This is insanity. maybe the silver lining to come from that disaster is that there are normal people like me who are questioning more and who have then dug deeper to see exactly what's going on and to see why these numbers are what they are, to see what's happening with big pharma. I sometimes, part of me, I have to be honest with you, doesn't have hope that this can be turned around because we're so far down that road. Why should I be hopeful if you're in office that this, first of all, a pandemic comes again, it'll be handled differently. I know you would handle that differently. But secondly, that there is hope, and we can end on this, that there is hope
if
for
I'm
parents.
elected, I will end the chronic disease epidemic, not just slow it down, I'll end it. I mean, I've been litigating against these agencies, against NIH, CDC, FDA, EPA. I've probably sued them more than any other attorney in the country. They've become captured by the industries they're supposed to regulate, so they're run by pharmaceutical companies, and that's why we're having this problem. If they were doing real science, we wouldn't have this problem. If we knew where these diseases are coming from, we do. We know where they're coming from.
We do.
You don't have enough science to make a lawsuit on it. So you need about 15 or 20 studies that are epidemiological, bench studies, animal studies, observational studies, and then you can litigate on it. And let's say, take high fructose corn syrup. There's a huge cartel that is pushing that. Millions of farmers who've been made dependent upon, monoculture GMO corn.
Mm-hmm.
The methane industry, all of these, there's Cargill and Monsanto and all of these big companies that finance Congress. It's very tough to fight that cartel, but you can do it if you have science. Because the lawyers then can sue and say, okay, these kids have juvenile diabetes, they have obesity. And one of the key contributing factors, as all this science shows, is high fructose corn syrup.
Mm-hmm.
They were never warned about it. They were told it was safe, and now
we're
we're going to
addicted.
sue them, and they're going to pay big time, and they're going to stop making it. And that's what I did with my team, with Monsanto, with Roundup. Everybody said you'll never get rid of Roundup. Well, we got a $2.2 billion jury verdict and a $289 million jury verdict and an $89 million jury verdict. And Monsanto came to the table and said, we're going to take it out of home gardening products. You can do it, you can fix it, but you need to do real science. And
people,
NIH blocks that kind of science.
Correct.
They will not let anybody do it. And NIH has a $42 billion budget. It distributes that money to 56,000 scientists all around, mainly universities. And they're supposed to be figuring out why are we so sick, but they don't. What they do is they develop drugs to treat the chronic disease epidemic, and they're all getting rich.
They're getting rich, and it's just like what happened with the vaccines, and therefore, we remain dependent upon them.
And they lie to us. They lie about it. And not only are they covering it up, not only are they making sure nobody studies the real etiology of these diseases, but they lie about the science.
And then won't even allow us to look at the science to then make educated decisions for ourselves and for our family members. So that's the thing, trust the science, but only when we tell you it's okay to trust the science.
I'm the only presidential candidate who is even talking about this, but I'm also the only one that can do anything because I know how these industries work.
And you've done it, and you've proven. And that's what I want to end on, because I hope that no matter what happens, you have 6 babies. They're always your baby, no matter how old they are, right? You 6 children, and no matter what happens in November, no matter what happens for the rest of your life, you've done so much for so many. What do you hope your kids say to their grandkids someday about who you were?
That's not my business. What other people think or say about me is not my business. What my business is to keep doing the next right thing and, to do everything I can to win this battle, to make sure that our kids get their health back.
I understand that. I guess I look at, and my dad's my hero. He's 78 years old. He has 2 kinds of cancer. There's all the things. He's an Army officer. So many things. And at the end of the day, I'm so proud of him. I'll tell you later, but I'm so proud of what he's done for others. He was the first Black man to ever play varsity football at West Point. He went through so much in the civil rights era, all those things. And at the end of the day, that's great. And then there's Gary Steele, the father. And that to me matters. Not just what we accomplished and what our resume ends up being. Your resume is ridiculous. It's incredible. You've done more than majority of people can never even have dreamt of. But I imagine it's a little more important with your family and with your kids. So I respect that. I just feel like, my goodness, there's more to you than that. There's this and this beautiful family that you've created. And someday they will be saying, let me tell you what Grandpa used to do to me, you know? I mean, I respect that part of you.
I'm very proud of my family.
I know.
And I think, you know, my kids are miracles because they all went through tough times. And, you know, I'm very grateful to Cheryl, who, you know, is the best human being I've ever met. And she is, you know, she stepped in and filled a big vacuum in all of our lives. And, you know, my kids have gone through tough stuff. And they have, and they've all turned into extraordinary, exceptional human beings. And they're, you know, with every gift. And I'm very, very proud of them. And, you know,
I just can only imagine how proud they are of you and what you're doing, because you don't have to do this right now. You don't. This is because you care about people that you'll never even meet. And I think that's probably not enough attention is focused on that from the human aspect of why you're doing this.
well, you know, I'm lucky because my kids are proud of me, and they tell me that all the time. I feel very, very fortunate.
It's a blessing, but you've created it too. You're just not going to pat yourself on the back for the kids. That's okay. I'll do it for you. Thank you.
Thank you
for taking the time. It means a lot. I think it's such a scary, confusing time right now for so many people. And as you know, a lot of people are like, I don't want to vote for Biden. I don't want to vote for Trump. Help me, someone more in the middle. And I'm just grateful for the time to share more than just what you believe in policy-wise. It means something to a lot of Americans.
Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good to meet you.
It's great to meet you. Can I end with this little game? I hope you like this. And if not, you can throw the cards at me, okay? This is our little creation. This is silly. It's time to play Who Wants to Be President of the United States. It's a game that I think you would qualify for. Okay, put these people in order for most lies that did damage to the population of the U.S. Anthony Fauci, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Tom Sandoval from Vanderpump Rules.
I wrote a book about Anthony Fauci, and I would say that his dishonesty probably did more to hurt the world and to, we had the highest death rate of any country in the world from COVID. We have 4.2% of the world's population, but we had 16% of the COVID deaths, and I would say that that's largely due to his bad leadership.
The man that we were told to trust. Thank you for that answer. If you win the presidency, let me rephrase. When you win the presidency, which of these will you do on day one? Storm the CDC, storm the FDA, storm the USDA, storm the NIH, close the border, finally get that well-deserved Secret Service protection. Those are your choices.
I would say all of the above.
All of the above. Can we do that all on day one?
Yeah, I'm going to go the first week. I'm going to make trips down to each of those agencies. USDA is a little harder because we need to get people in there, and that takes some time. But the other agencies, I know exactly what to do. At FDA, NIH, CDC, I know exactly what to do. I know the people who have to be moved, and I know the kind of pep talk that
pep talk. That's the nice way of putting that, right?
To give to.
Can I come? Can I just watch?
Yeah.
Fly on the wall. Who is the bigger threat to free speech? Facebook, Joe Biden, FBI, CIA, or Disney?
I think the longer term threat probably comes from the intelligence community, from the CIA. And if you look, at the who's running a lot of the major publications now, I mean, the woman who just took over NPR is, has very, very clear links to the CIA. The people who are running Rolling Stone today, Noah Schlagman, people who run Daily Beast, Daily Kos, Salon.
It's out in the open. They're publicly acknowledging, well, we need to control this more. That's what's shocking to me, is that they're just out there. Okay, last one. Who is older? Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, or the Crypt Keeper?
I don't know who's the eldest. I think maybe Nancy Pelosi is, but I don't know. Or Mitch McConnell has got to be. I think between President Trump and President Biden's a little older.
Yes. You win because, yes, Nancy Pelosi. Although I thought Mitch McConnell. I thought Mitch just, he looks older and acts older. Nancy, 84, Mitch, 82, Joe Biden, 81, Donald Trump, 77. And then we have Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is barely 70 years old, but looks physically like you're 45. That's not right.
Thank you.
No, that's not fair, actually. That's BS that you're able to continue to do that. What's the workout regimen on the road?
I do exercise every day. I try to hike every morning and then I spend 30 minutes at a gym every day.
Every day, no matter which city?
Yep.
Is there a key, like the 50 push-ups, like my dad still tries to
I do.
do?
I have 5 different routines, and I just alternate every day.
Incredible. And then when do you have time for falconry? When do you have time for?
Falconry is, the season ends March 30th, and I don't.
Oh, the season, I didn't think.
Yeah, the hunting season.
Yeah.
It begins mid-September, but you can't really fly hawks until the leaves are off the trees. So that's usually, in the Northeast, that's mid-October.
Do you golf?
Do I golf? No.
Okay, so we won't be following you, from golf course to golf course when you should be, on Pennsylvania Avenue. But we might find you in the woods somewhere.
Yeah.
A little better. Okay. God bless you.
God bless you.
Thank you,
Stacey.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And look, you got some new fuzzy socks, which you hate. Thank you.